Picture yourself standing in the British Museum on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The crowds have thinned. Your footsteps echo against marble floors as you approach a particular glass case in the Mesopotamian gallery. Inside, resting on velvet, are fragments of clay simple, unassuming, the colour of dried earth. They are covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks, pressed into the surface over 4,000 years ago by human hands you will never know. These are Sumerian tablets, and they hold secrets. The ancient Sumerians, inhabiting the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now southern Iraq, created one of humanity's first civilizations. Between approximately 3,500 and 2000 BCE, they built cities, invented writing, developed complex mathematics, and recorded their world with meticulous care. But here's what makes your heart quicken. As you lean closer to that glass case, we've only translated a fraction of what they left behind. Approximately 500,000 cuneiform tablets have been discovered. Perhaps 30,000 have been fully translated and published. The rest sit in museum basements, university storage facilities, and private collections around the world, waiting for someone to read them, waiting to reveal what they know, what knowledge lies dormant in that untranslated clay. What observations, what discoveries, what understanding of their world and ours remains locked in a script we can read but haven't yet had time to fully comprehend. Section 1, the discovery, the story of how we discovered these records is almost as remarkable as the records themselves. In December of 1845, a young British adventurer named Austen Henry Layard began excavating a series of mounds near the modern Iraqi city of Mosul. Layard wasn't a trained archaeologist. The discipline barely existed yet, but he was curious, ambitious, and willing to dig in difficult conditions for the promise of discovery. He'd heard rumours of ancient cities buried beneath the earth, their names preserved in biblical texts and classical writings, but their locations lost to time. What he found changed everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. Beneath one particular mound called Q-Anjik, Layard discovered the remains of Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital that had once ruled an empire stretching from Egypt to Persia. But far more importantly, he found rooms, chamber after chamber filled with clay tablets, tens of thousands of them stacked on shelves, organized with a system that suggested purpose and care. They had been carefully arranged before the library burned in 612 BCE, when the Medes and Babylonians sacked the city and reduced it to ash and rubble. The fire, ironically, had baked the clay tablets hard as stone, preserving them for 2.5 millennia in a kind of accidental immortality. This was the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, and it contained not just Assyrian records, but copies of much older Sumerian texts that Ashurbanipal's scribes had carefully preserved. The Assyrians, you see, revered the Sumerians the way Renaissance Europeans would later revere the Greeks and Romans. They collected Sumerian literature, copied Sumerian king lists, studied Sumerian mathematics and astronomy, learned the Sumerian language even though it hadn't been spoken for over 1,000 years. Without this Assyrian reverence for Sumerian culture, without their careful work of cultural preservation, much of what we know today would have been lost forever, dissolved back into the earth from which the clay originally came. But Layard's discovery, as extraordinary as it was represented only the beginning of our understanding. In the decades that followed, excavations at Sumerian sites like Uruk, Nippur, and Lagash revealed the true scope of Sumerian record-keeping. These weren't just royal inscriptions carved to glorify kings or religious texts meant to propitiate gods. The Sumerians documented everything. Business transactions recording the sale of a single sheep, legal disputes over field boundaries, marriage contracts specifying dowries down to the last item, student exercises showing a child's first attempts at writing, medical prescriptions with precise measurements, astronomical observations noting the position of Venus, mathematical problems calculating the volume of granaries, hymns to gods, proverbs about daily life, epic poetry exploring the meaning of mortality. They wrote it all down. Everything. At Nippur, archaeologists found the remains of a scribal school, what the Sumerians called an eduba, or tablet house, complete with student practice tablets showing corrections made by teachers thousands of years dead. Some tablets had been reused, the surface smoothed and rewritten multiple times, like an ancient eraser board bearing the traces of lessons learned and forgotten and learned again. One exercise tablet shows a student's clumsy attempt at reproducing cuneiform signs, with the teacher's exasperated note scrawled in the margin, "You wrote it crooked." 4,000 years later, that teacher's frustration still resonates across the ages. Some things about human nature, it seems, never change. The student who doesn't quite get it right, the teacher trying to maintain patience, the small daily struggles of education and learning all preserved in clay, because someone thought these practice exercises were worth keeping, worth storing, worth remembering. The scholar who first cracked the code of cuneiform writing was Henry Rawlinson, a British Army officer stationed in Persia in the 1830s. Rawlinson risked his life copying a massive inscription carved into a cliff face at Behistun, working from precarious scaffolding hundreds of feet above the ground, suspended over a sheer drop that would have meant certain death. That inscription, written by the Persian king Darius the Great in 3 languages, including Old Persian, provided the key to understanding cuneiform script. Like the Rosetta Stone had unlocked Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Behistun inscription gave scholars a way into the wedge-shaped writing that had mystified European travellers since the Renaissance. By the late 19th century, scholars could read Akkadian, the Semitic language of Babylon and Assyria, but Sumerian proved more difficult, more elusive. It was a language isolate, utterly unrelated to any known language family. Its grammar was unlike the Semitic languages that surrounded it geographically. Its vocabulary shared no roots with neighbouring tongues. Its structure defied easy categorization. For years, some scholars doubted Sumerian had been a spoken language at all, suggesting instead that it might be an artificial priestly code, a ceremonial language invented by priests for religious purposes, but never actually spoken in homes or markets or fields. That debate was finally settled in the early 20th century, thanks in large part to the tireless work of scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer, who spent decades translating Sumerian literary texts at the University of Pennsylvania. Kramer called the Sumerians' histories first great civilization, and his translations revealed a people of remarkable sophistication, unexpected humor, and profound humanity. Through Kramer's work and the work of his colleagues and successors, the Sumerians stopped being a mysterious ancient culture and became recognizably human people who loved and worried and complained and celebrated, who told jokes and wrote poetry and argued about property lines. But even Cranmer, who translated more Sumerian tablets than perhaps any scholar before or since, who devoted his entire professional life to understanding these ancient texts, could only scratch the surface. The tablets kept coming. Every excavation season brought more. Every museum storage room revealed caches of tablets that had been sitting unexamined for decades, and each tablet might contain anything an astronomical observation that changes our understanding of Sumerian science, a legal case that reveals social dynamics, a poem that breaks your heart with its timeless emotion, a business receipt that tells you the price of barley in the year 2100 BCE. The sheer volume is overwhelming. When archaeologists excavate a Mesopotamian site, they don't find tablets one at a time, carefully placed. They find them in heaps, in rooms, in baskets. At some sites, tablets are so numerous they are measured not in individual pieces, but by the cubic meter. Storage rooms in museums contain thousands of tablets that have been photographed and catalogued, but never translated. University collections hold tablets acquired a century ago that no expert has examined in detail. Private collections, some legal, some ethically questionable, contain unknown quantities of tablets that scholars have never even seen. And these aren't all tiny fragments. Some are substantial documents, complete texts, carefully preserved by the dry conditions that characterize much of Iraq. They wait in climate-controlled storage, each one a voice from the past ready to speak. If only someone with the right knowledge and enough time would listen, what might be in those untranslated tablets? What astronomical observations might refine our understanding of ancient celestial mechanics? What medical treatments might prove surprisingly effective when tested by modern science? What mathematical insights might solve problems we still struggle with? What literature might take its place among the great works of human creativity? What personal letters might reveal the intimate details of individual lives? What historical records might fill gaps in our knowledge, answering questions we have been asking for generations? We don't know. We can't know. Not until someone reads them. Consider the implications of this for a moment. Imagine discovering a library containing 500,000 books from an ancient civilization, but only having time to read 60,000 of them. The rest remain on the shelves, spines facing out, waiting. You know they contain knowledge, wisdom, stories, data, observations, insights. But you don't know which books contain what. You don't know if the next book you pull from the shelf will be routine or revolutionary. Every tablet is Schrödinger's discovery, simultaneously profound and mundane, until the moment someone translates it. This is the tantalizing reality of Sumerian studies today. We have more primary source material than we know what to do with. We're not limited by lack of evidence. We're limited by lack of time, lack of funding, lack of trained specialists who can read Sumerian fluently. The knowledge exists. It's preserved. It's accessible. It's just waiting for someone to do the painstaking work of translation. And what has been translated already has forced us to completely revise our understanding of ancient civilization. The Sumerians weren't simple farmers who stumbled into literacy. They weren't primitive people taking humanity's first faltering steps towards civilization. They were sophisticated, organized, intellectually curious, technologically innovative, artistically creative, and remarkably modern in their thinking. They developed concepts and systems we still use today. They asked questions we're still trying to answer. They achieved things that impress us even with all our modern advantages. To understand why these records matter so much, why scholars dedicate their entire careers to studying fragments of 4,000-year-old clay, we must first understand who the Sumerians actually were, not the mythologized ancients of popular imagination, but the real people, the farmers and priests and merchants and scribes and soldiers and kings who built cities from mud brick, who looked up at the stars and tried to understand what they saw, who fell in love and raised families and worried about paying their taxes and hoped their names would be remembered after they died. Let us turn, then, to the question that underlies everything else, Section 2, who were the Sumerians, to understand the significance of what lies preserved in those clay tablets. You must first picture the land that gave birth to this civilization. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing on the flat alluvial plain of southern Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago. The sun beats down mercilessly. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction, broken only by the distant line where sky meets earth. Two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, snake across the landscape, their waters brown with silt, carried from distant mountains you cannot see. During spring floods, these rivers swell and rage, bursting their banks, transforming the plain into a temporary sea. During summer, the same rivers shrink, leaving behind cracked mud and fields desperate for water. This is the land the Sumerians chose to call home, or perhaps it chose them. The question of Sumerian origins remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. The Sumerians inhabited this challenging landscape, what we now call southern Iraq, between approximately 3,500 and 2000 BCE. But here's what puzzles scholars: they appear seemingly fully formed in the archaeological record. There's no clear progression from simple villages to complex cities, no obvious predecessor culture that gradually evolved into Sumerian civilization. They are simply there, suddenly, building urban centers of unprecedented size and complexity, writing in a fully developed script, worshipping gods whose names suggest they came from somewhere else entirely. Their language offers no help in solving this mystery. Sumerian is a language isolate, bearing no demonstrable relationship to any other known language family. It's not Semitic like Akkadian or Hebrew or Arabic. It's not Indo-European like Persian or Greek or Sanskrit. It's not related to any language spoken in the region before or since. This linguistic isolation has led scholars to propose various theories. Perhaps the Sumerians migrated from the Caucasus Mountains, or from India, or from some now vanished Central Asian homeland. Perhaps they arrived by sea from an unknown origin. Or perhaps they were there all along, and we simply haven't found the archaeological evidence of their earlier, simpler settlements. We may never know the answer. The Sumerians themselves left no origin myth explaining where they came from, no story of migration or ancestral homeland. They seemed content to simply be Sumerian, as if the question of origins didn't particularly interest them. Their identity was bound to the land, between the rivers, to the cities they built, to the gods they worshipped. And what cities they built? Uruk, in its prime around 3000 BCE, may have housed as many as 80,000 people, a staggering population for the ancient world. To put this in perspective, Athens, at its classical height 2,000 years later, had a comparable population. London in the 14th century CE, nearly 5,000 years after Uruk's founding, was roughly the same size. The Sumerians created genuine urban centers at a time when most of humanity still lived in small villages or as nomadic groups. These weren't haphazard collections of dwellings that had grown organically over time. Sumerian cities were planned, organized, sophisticated in their layout. At the center rose the ziggurat, massive stepped pyramid serving as both temple and statement of civic pride, visible for miles across the flat plain. Around the ziggurat clustered the temple precinct, housing priests and scribes and containing workshops where artisans produced goods for the gods and for trade. Beyond that lay residential districts organized by occupation and social class, with wealthy homes featuring central courtyards and multiple rooms, while poorer dwellings crowded together in narrow lanes. The cities had city walls, massive defensive structures built from millions of mud bricks. They had gates that could be closed and defended. They had harbours where boats from distant lands docked. They had market districts where merchants from dozens of cities haggled over prices. They had craft quarters where potters and metalworkers and weavers produced their goods. They had sacred districts where religious festivals drew crowds of thousands. They had administrative centres where bureaucrats tracked every bushel of grain, every sheep, every transaction. But the most remarkable Sumerian creation wasn't visible in the cityscape. It was conceptual, organizational, revolutionary in its implications. The Sumerians developed sophisticated irrigation systems that transformed their challenging environment into one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world. Look at the problem they faced. The Tigris and Euphrates flooded unpredictably in spring, often destroying crops and drowning fields. Summer brought drought. Rainfall was minimal and unreliable. Without intervention, farming was a gamble against nature's whims. But the Sumerians didn't accept these limits. They dug canals, not small ditches, but major waterworks requiring the coordinated labour of thousands of workers. They built reservoirs to store water. They constructed levees to control flooding. They created a network of irrigation channels that brought water precisely where and when it was needed. This required more than just physical labour. It required mathematics to survey fields and calculate gradients so water would flow properly. It required engineering to prevent erosion and manage water pressure. It required social organisation on an unprecedented scale, because irrigation systems cross property boundaries and city territories. Water from the same canal might irrigate fields belonging to dozens of different families, and everyone had to cooperate or the system failed. This cooperation, this necessity of managing shared resources, may have been one of the fundamental drivers of Sumerian civilization. You can't maintain complex irrigation without record keeping, without laws governing water rights, without some authority to settle disputes and organize maintenance. The tablets that documented these systems, who was responsible for which section of canal, when cleaning had to happen, how water was allocated during drought. These mundane administrative records represent the skeleton of civilization itself. The Sumerians didn't just survive in their environment, they transformed it. And in transforming it, They created something entirely new in human history, a literate, urban, bureaucratic civilization capable of coordinating large-scale projects and preserving knowledge across generations. The society that emerged from this agricultural foundation was complex and hierarchical. At the top sat the nobility kings, high priests, wealthy landowners who controlled vast estates. Below them were the commoners, farmers, artisans, merchants, scribes, soldiers, all the ordinary people who made the economy function. And at the bottom were slaves, prisoners of war, or people who had sold themselves or their children into servitude to pay debts. But this hierarchy wasn't rigid in the way we might imagine. Social mobility existed. A talented scribe from a modest family could rise to positions of influence. A successful merchant could accumulate enough wealth to rival nobility. Women, remarkably for the ancient world, could own property independently, conduct business, become scribes, serve as priestesses with significant authority. The famous Enheduanna, whom we'll encounter again later, was not only the world's first named author, but also held tremendous religious and political power as high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur. What innovations can we attribute to the Sumerians? The list reads like a catalogue of civilizations' fundamental building blocks. They invented writing around 3400 BCE, beginning with pictographic symbols that gradually evolved into the abstract cuneiform script. They invented the wheel, transforming transportation and pottery production. They invented the plough, revolutionizing agriculture. They developed bronze metallurgy, learning to combine copper and tin to create a harder metal suitable for tools and weapons. They invented the sailboat, harnessing wind power for river transport. They discovered the arch in architecture, enabling the construction of more complex buildings. Their mathematical innovations still shape our world. The Sumerians developed a base 60 number system, sexagesimal rather than our decimal system. Why 60? Because 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made it extraordinarily practical for commerce and measurement, allowing easy calculation of fractions without the need for decimals. We still use their system today: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you check a clock or describe an angle, you're using Sumerian mathematics. They even invented beer brewing, and they loved beer. Multiple tablets contain detailed brewing recipes, and the Sumerians had a specific goddess, Ninkasi, who presided over beer production. A hymn to Ninkasi doubles as a brewing recipe, preserving the technique in poetic form, the filtering vat, which makes a pleasant sound. You place appropriately on a large collector vat. Ninkasi, the filtering vat, which makes a pleasant sound. You place appropriately on a large collector vat. Modern brewers have used this 4,000-year-old recipe to recreate Sumerian beer. Reports suggest it was strong, slightly sour, and drunk through straws to avoid the sediment that settled at the bottom. The Sumerian religious worldview shaped every aspect of their lives. They were polytheistic, worshipping a pantheon of gods who controlled various aspects of existence, and was the sky god, Enlil the god of air and storms, Enki the god of water and wisdom, Nineveh the mother goddess. Inanna, later known as Ishtar, was the complex goddess of both love and war, embodying contradictions that the Sumerians seemed to find entirely natural. Each city had its own patron deity. Uruk belonged to Inanna, or served the moon god Nanna. Nippur was the sacred city of Enlil. This meant that inter-city conflicts weren't just political, but also theological when one city conquered another. It represented not just military victory, but divine supremacy. What's striking about Sumerian religion is how practical and human-scaled it was. The gods weren't distant, perfect beings far removed from earthly concerns. They were powerful but omnipotent, wise but not omniscient, moral but not perfectly good. They had needs, desires, weaknesses. They got hungry and needed offerings. They appreciated praise. They made mistakes. They played favorites. They feuded with each other. One famous myth explains that the gods created humans because they were tired of doing agricultural work themselves. The gods had been digging canals and tending fields, and they went on strike, refusing to continue the hard labor. So Enki proposed creating humans to do the work instead. It's a remarkably pragmatic creation story. Humans exist to serve the gods' needs. But implicit in this story is also an acknowledgement that humans are necessary, that even gods need help, that the relationship between divine and human is one of mutual dependence. The Sumerians built their entire social structure around serving these gods. Ziggurats were literally the gods' houses, built as artificial mountains, because the Sumerians believed gods lived on mountaintops, perhaps a memory of their mysterious origins. Priests and priestesses attended the gods' statues, providing them with daily meals, clothing them in fine garments, entertaining them with music. Festivals recreated mythological events, allowing humans to participate in sacred narratives. The sacred marriage ritual, in which the king symbolically married the goddess Inanna, was believed to ensure fertility and prosperity for the coming year. Legal documents reveal the texture of daily life in ways that grand religious and political narratives cannot. Marriage contracts specified exactly what each party brought to the union. A typical contract might list the bride's dowry: 1 bed, 2 chairs, 3 wool blankets, 10 shekels of silver, 2 bronze mirrors, 1 lapis lazuli necklace. Everything itemized, everything accounted for, everything legally binding. Divorce was possible rare, but legal, and the contracts specified how property would be divided if the marriage ended. Adoption papers survive, showing that childless couples could legally adopt, that the adopted child would inherit as, if born to the family, that the biological and legal parents all signed agreements protecting everyone's interests. One tablet records a woman adopting her nephew after his parents died, carefully specifying that he would inherit her estate and care for her in old age, and that he would maintain the family's religious obligations, making offerings to deceased ancestors. Court records show Sumerians loved to sue each other. Property disputes were particularly common. Someone's irrigation canal encroached on someone else's field, or a wall was built too close to a property line, or an inheritance was contested by multiple claimants. The tablets record testimony from both sides, evidence presented, witnesses called, and finally the judgment. One famous case involves a man accused of not returning a borrowed copper vessel. The defendant claims he returned it years ago. The plaintiff insists he never got it back. Witnesses are called. Character is questioned. The judge eventually rules for the plaintiff, ordering the defendant to pay compensation. These weren't primitive people stumbling toward civilization. They were sophisticated, organized, intellectually curious individuals who built a complex society and documented it meticulously. They cared about education, establishing formal schools to train scribes. They valued honesty in commerce, creating standardized weights and measures to prevent fraud. They respected tradition, carefully preserving ancient texts and teaching their language to succeeding generations. They loved their children, as evidenced by letters that Savivia's father writing to his son studying in another city, simultaneously proud and worried. They mourned their dead, leaving offerings and writing lamentations that still resonate with grief 4 millennia later. The Sumerians were, quite simply, human in every way that matters. They had the same range of emotions, the same concerns, the same hopes and fears that we experience today. The distance between us is measured in time, not in fundamental nature, and they wrote it all down. That is perhaps their greatest legacy. They decided that knowledge, transactions, stories, prayers, everything was worth recording. They created one of humanity's first formal education systems specifically to teach writing, because they valued literacy so highly. The tablets that survive represent a conscious choice to preserve, to document, to communicate across time. As we turn now to examine specific categories of tablets, the mathematics, the astronomy, the medicine, the literature, remember that each document represents a person. A scribe sat down with a lump of wet clay and a reed stylus and carefully pressed symbols into the surface, knowing that this tablet might outlive them, might speak their knowledge or record their transaction or preserve their words long after they were gone. They succeeded beyond measure. The Sumerians are dust, their cities ruins, their language dead for 2,000 years before Christ walked the earth. But their words remain. And those words, the ones we have translated, and the hundreds of thousands still waiting, they still speak. Section 3, the mathematics tablets. Among the most remarkable Sumerian records are mathematical tablets that reveal capabilities far beyond what we expected from a civilization that existed 4,000 years ago. These aren't simple counting exercises or basic arithmetic. These are sophisticated mathematical texts that demonstrate abstract thinking, elegant problem solving, and conceptual understanding that would not be matched, let alone surpassed, for over 1,000 years. In the early 1900s, an American named Edgar Banks purchased a small clay tablet from a dealer in Iraq. Banks was an archaeologist and antiquities trader, and this particular tablet, unremarkable in appearance, roughly the size of a modern smartphone, eventually made its way to George Arthur Plimpton, a publisher and collector who donated it to Columbia University. For decades, it sat in the university's collection, catalogued as Plimpton 322, quietly waiting for someone to understand what it represented. The tablet contained 4 columns of numbers written in cuneiform, 60 numbers in total, arranged in 15 rows. The edges were damaged, suggesting it was once larger. But what did these numbers mean? Scholars puzzled over it for years. Some thought it was an accounting document. Others suggested it was an astronomical table. The numbers seemed to follow patterns, but the purpose remained mysterious. Then, in 2017, mathematician Daniel Mansfield and his colleague Norman Wildberger from the University of New South Wales published a paper that sent ripples through both the mathematical and archaeological communities. Plimpton 322, they argued, was a trigonometric table. More than that, it was the oldest trigonometric table ever discovered, predating the Greek astronomer Hipparchus, previously credited with inventing trigonometry by more than 1,000 years. But here's what makes Plimpton 322 truly extraordinary. It's not just older than Greek trigonometry. In some ways, it's more accurate. Modern trigonometry uses approximations, values like pi, or the square root of 2, which are irrational numbers that we round to make calculations possible. The Sumerian approach used exact ratios, no approximations needed. For certain applications, particularly in architecture and land surveying, this Sumerian method produces more precise results than our modern system. Think about what this means. A scribe 4,000 years ago, sitting in a scribal school or temple workshop, understood mathematical relationships that we thought required Greek geometry to discover. They could calculate angles and lengths with precision that ancient builders needed for constructing temples, ziggurats, city walls, and they created a reference table, essentially an ancient calculator that anyone with the proper training could use. The tablet tells us something else, too. This wasn't the work of a single genius having one brilliant insight. The calculations required to create this table are too complex, too systematic. This represents an accumulated tradition of mathematical knowledge, passed down through generations of scribes, refined over time, taught in schools, preserved because it was useful. Plimpton 322 is the visible peak of an invisible mountain of mathematical thinking, and Plimpton 322 is just one tablet among thousands containing mathematical content. The Sumerian number system itself was a marvel of practical design. While we use base 10 lightly, because we have 10 fingers, the Sumerians used base 60. This sexagesimal system wasn't arbitrary. 60 has an extraordinary number of divisors. It can be divided evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made calculations involving fractions far simpler than our decimal system allows. Imagine you're a Sumerian merchant dividing goods among partners. You need to split your inventory into thirds, or fourths, or fifths. In the sexagesimal system, these divisions produce whole numbers or simple fractions. In our base 10 system, many common fractions become repeating decimals, messy, awkward, difficult to calculate without modern tools. The Sumerians chose a number system optimized for the mathematics they needed to perform every day. Their understanding of place value was equally sophisticated. They recognized that the same symbol could represent different magnitudes depending on its position, the same principle that allows us to distinguish between 5, 50, and 500. This seems obvious now, but it's a profound conceptual leap. It requires understanding that numbers are abstract entities that can be manipulated symbolically, not just concrete collections of things. They even used a symbol functioning like our 0, a placeholder, indicating the absence of a value in a particular position. This predates the Indian invention of 0 by over 1,000 years, though the Sumerian symbol wasn't quite as fully developed as the later concept. Still, it shows they understood the problem and created a solution. The mathematical tablets we've translated reveal the kinds of problems Sumerian scribes worked on. Many are practical, what we might call applied mathematics. One tablet calculates how much grain can be stored in a cylindrical granary of specific dimensions. Another determines the amount of earth that must be moved to dig a canal of a certain length, width, and depth. A third calculates compound interest on a loan, showing that Sumerian bankers understood that interest accumulates on interest. But others are purely theoretical, mathematical problems posed for their own sake. Tablets contain problems like a number and its reciprocal sum to a certain value. What is the number? This is algebra, finding unknown values through mathematical manipulation. The Sumerians were solving algebraic equations 2,000 years before the Arabic scholars who gave algebra its name. Geometry problems abound. Calculate the area of irregular fields. Determine the volume of a truncated pyramid. Find the diagonal of a rectangle given its sides. These problems appear in student exercise tablets, suggesting they were part of the standard curriculum. Young scribes in training, sitting in the ajuba with their practice tablets, worked through the same kinds of geometry problems that students tackle today. Perhaps most remarkably, Sumerian tablets contain problems involving what we now call Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 whole numbers that satisfy the Pythagorean theorem, the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. One tablet, known as YBC 7289, shows a square with its diagonals drawn. Along one diagonal is written the number for the square root of 2, calculated to an accuracy of 6 decimal places. This is 1500 years before Pythagoras, and the Sumerians had already worked out the mathematics of right triangles to extraordinary precision. How did they calculate square roots to such accuracy without calculators or computers? Through iterative approximation methods, they would make a guess, test it, refine it, test again, gradually zeroing in on the answer. The tablet doesn't show the work, only the result, but mathematicians who have studied these texts have reverse engineered the likely methods. The Sumerians understood algorithms, step-by-step procedures for solving problems. Tables were particularly important tools. Sumerian scribes created multiplication tables, reciprocal tables, tables of squares, and cubes, tables of square roots. These were reference works, the ancient equivalent of calculators or computer spreadsheets. A scribe facing a complex calculation could look up intermediate values rather than computing everything from scratch. This dramatically increased efficiency and reduced errors. One particularly extensive set of tablets contains what scholars call series texts, comprehensive collections of mathematical knowledge organized systematically. These aren't just random problems, they're structured educational materials, progressing from simple to complex, building skills methodically. They represent curriculum, textbooks written in clay, preserved because Sumerian educators valued preserving knowledge for future students. The practical applications of this mathematical sophistication were everywhere. Surveying land required geometry and trigonometry. The Sumerians had to calculate field areas precisely for tax purposes, for irrigation planning, for legal disputes over boundaries. Tablets record surveys of fields, with measurements, calculations, and maps showing borders. Architecture demanded mathematics. Building a ziggurat required calculating volumes of earth and brick, load-bearing capacities, angles of stairs, proportions that would be aesthetically pleasing and structurally sound. The fact that Sumerian ziggurats stood for centuries testifies to the accuracy of their calculations. Astronomy, which we'll explore in depth shortly, was fundamentally mathematical. Predicting planetary positions, calculating the length of the lunar month, understanding eclipse cycles, all of this required sophisticated mathematical models. The astronomical tablets are filled with numbers, with calculations, with tables predicting celestial events. Commerce and administration couldn't function without mathematics. Every transaction, every tax collection, every inventory, every loan, every wage payment required calculation. The tens of thousands of economic tablets are mathematical documents recording quantities, prices, sums, balances. The Sumerian economy ran on mathematics, but perhaps what impresses most is not the specific problems they solved or the accuracy of their calculations. What impresses is the evidence of mathematical thinking itself, the recognition that abstract relationships govern quantities, that patterns can be discovered and exploited, that problems can be solved systematically through logical steps. There's a tablet, just a fragment, really that contains what appears to be a scribe's doodling. In the margin, someone has drawn geometric shapes and played with number patterns. It's not part of any official document or formal problem set. It's just a person 4,000 years ago thinking about numbers for the pleasure of it, exploring patterns because they found them interesting. This is mathematical curiosity in its pure form. Another tablet shows a calculation error, crossed out, corrected. The scribe made a mistake added when they should have multiplied or transposed digits and caught it, fixed it. This small human moment of error and correction reminds us that behind these impressive achievements were people learning, sometimes struggling, occasionally making mistakes, working to get things right. One particularly touching find from Nippur is a student's practice tablet that's been corrected by a teacher. The student calculated the area of a field and got it wrong. The teacher didn't just mark it incorrect, they worked through the problem step by step, showing where the student went wrong and how to fix it. This is teaching, preserved in clay, one person helping another understand, passing knowledge forward across the generations. The sophistication of Sumerian mathematics has forced us to reconsider the trajectory of mathematical history. For a long time, the narrative went Egyptians had basic mathematics, Greeks invented rigorous mathematical thinking, medieval Islamic scholars preserved and extended it, and modern Europe built on that foundation. The Sumerians were acknowledged but treated as primitive precursors, people who could count and do simple arithmetic, but nothing more. Every new translation challenges that narrative. The Sumerians weren't stumbling toward mathematics, they had mathematics. They understood concepts that took other cultures thousands of years to develop. They created methods that, in some cases, were only now rediscovering and appreciating. Computer scientists studying the history of algorithms look at Sumerian mathematical texts and recognize procedural thinking, the step-by-step logic that underlies computer programming. The Sumerians wrote algorithms in cuneiform, procedures for solving problems that anyone could follow. Engineers examining Sumerian structures and the mathematical tablets that described their construction find sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics, load distribution, material properties. These weren't people accidentally building things that happened to stand up. They were calculating, planning, applying theoretical knowledge to practical problems. Mathematicians analyzing Sumerian numerical methods sometimes find approaches that are, in specific contexts, superior to modern techniques. The exact trigonometry of Plimpton 322 is one example. Their handling of certain fractions is another. We developed different methods, not necessarily better ones, just different, optimized for different tools and purposes. What else might be waiting in the untranslated mathematical tablets? There are thousands of them, sitting in collections, photographed but not studied in detail. Most are probably routine student exercises, standard reference tables, everyday calculations, but some might contain surprises, perhaps other mathematical insights that challenge our historical timeline, perhaps different approaches to problems we solved differently, perhaps evidence of mathematical knowledge that was later lost and had to be rediscovered. Every few years, a mathematician or historian picks up a tablet that's been sitting in a museum for a century, really looks at it carefully for the first time, and discovers something unexpected. This continues to happen, will continue to happen. The tablets are patient. They can wait another century if needed. The mathematics they contain remains true, whether anyone reads it or not. But when someone does read them, when someone understands what the ancient scribe was calculating and why, a connection forms across 4,000 years. Two minds, separated by unimaginable time, meet in the abstract realm of mathematical truth. The scribe who pressed those numbers into wet clay could not have imagined the future readers, the computers we'd use, the civilization we'd build, the way we'd live. But they could imagine that mathematical truth was timeless, that the relationship between the sides of a right triangle would be the same forever, that whoever understood their symbols would understand their meaning. They were right. And in that rightness, in that timeless truth of mathematics, the Sumerians speak to us with perfect clarity. The same clarity appears in another realm where precise calculation and careful observation intersected the night sky. The Sumerians didn't just calculate for earthly purposes. They turned their mathematical sophistication toward the heavens, and what they discovered there would lay the foundation for astronomy itself. Section 4, the astronomical records. The Sumerians watched the sky with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Night after night, year after year, generation after generation, they observed, they recorded, they calculated. They looked for patterns in what appeared to be celestial chaos, and they found them. What they saw, and more importantly, what they understood about what they saw staggers modern astronomers who study their records. Imagine yourself on top of a ziggurat on a clear Mesopotamian night around 2500 BCE. The air is cool after the day's heat. The flat plain stretches endlessly in every direction, no light pollution to dim the heavens. Above you, the sky blazes with stars in a display that modern city dwellers can scarcely imagine. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light. Planets shine steadily while stars twinkle. The moon, if visible, casts shadows sharp enough to read by. You're not alone. Other observers are stationed here, as they are every clear night. They have clay tablets, reed styluses, reference texts. They know which stars are which planets wander among the fixed stars, which constellations mark the seasons. They are part of a tradition of observation stretching back centuries before their births, and they know their observations will be studied by observers centuries after their deaths. This is not casual stargazing. This is systematic astronomical observation, and the tablets that survive from this work reveal a sophistication that took Western astronomy 2,000 years to match. One of the most famous astronomical tablets is known as the Venice Tablet of Ammisaduqa, recording observations of the planet Venus over 21 years during the reign of a Babylonian king around 1600 BCE. But the Venus observations it contains are much older. They are copies of earlier Sumerian records, preserved and transmitted across generations. The tablet records when Venus appeared on the eastern horizon before sunrise, when it disappeared, how long it remained invisible, when it reappeared on the western horizon after sunset, and again disappeared. These observations are astonishingly precise. Modern astronomers have used computer models to calculate Venus positions during ancient times, and the Sumerian observations match the calculations to within days, sometimes within hours. This from naked eye observations made 4,000 years ago, recorded on clay tablets with reed styluses. Why would anyone spend 21 years tracking Venus? Because the Sumerians recognized that Venus follows a predictable cycle, and understanding that cycle allowed them to predict future positions. Venus was important to them. It represented the goddess Inanna, one of their most significant deities. But beyond religious significance, Venus served as a celestial clock, a marker of time that never failed, never needed winding, never stopped working. The astronomical compendium known as Mul, a pin-the-plough constellation, represents an even more comprehensive achievement. This is actually 2 tablets forming a single work, containing what amounts to an astronomical textbook, created around 1000 BCE, but containing much older Sumerian material. Mul Apin catalogues 66 stars and constellations, provides their rising and setting dates throughout the year, describes planetary movements, explains calendar intercalation rules, and presents mathematical schemes for tracking the sun's annual journey. Some of these constellations we still recognize. The Sumerian Gu, Lay the great one we call Aquarius, their Mul, the stars we know as the Pleiades, their Gafor, and Nath, bull of heaven, we call Taurus. Across 4,000 years, we look at the same patterns in the stars and see connections, stories, meaning. But Mul, Apin isn't just a star catalogue. It's a working manual for priests and scribes who needed to understand celestial mechanics for both religious and practical purposes. It explains, for instance, that the lunar year is approximately 11 days shorter than the solar year. This creates a problem if you use a pure lunar calendar. The seasons drift. The spring festival happens later each year, eventually falling in summer, then autumn, then winter. Agricultural societies need the calendar to match the seasons, or planting and harvest timing becomes chaotic. The Sumerian solution, preserved in Mul, Apin, and other texts, was a 19-year cycle with 7 intercalary months. 7 times during those 19 years, they added an extra month to bring the lunar calendar back into alignment with the solar year. After 19 years, the cycle repeated almost perfectly. The solar and lunar calendars synchronized again. This is the same cycle that the Greek astronomer Meton supposedly discovered in 432 BCE, now known as the Metonic cycle, but the Sumerians were using it more than 1,000 years earlier. They understood it so thoroughly that their agricultural calendars worked. Their religious festivals occurred at the proper seasons. Their entire society synchronized to both celestial cycles. Think about what this understanding required. It required tracking both the sun's annual motion and the moon's monthly cycle with precision. It required comparing them mathematically. It required recognizing that the patterns repeated over long periods. And it required institutional memory. No single person lives long enough to verify a 19-year cycle. You need records, you need teaching, you need the knowledge to pass from one generation of astronomers to the next. The Sumerians identified all 5 visible planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They tracked their movements against the background of fixed stars. They noticed that planets don't move uniformly across the sky. Sometimes they slow down, stop, move backward retrograde motion, stop again, then resume forward movement. This behavior must have seemed deeply mysterious, even magical. Yet the tablets record these movements systematically, noting when retrograde motion began and ended, measuring the distances traveled. They didn't understand that retrograde motion is an optical illusion caused by Earth's orbital motion relative to other planets. That knowledge required a heliocentric model of the solar system that wouldn't be developed for thousands of years. But they accurately described what they saw, and that accurate description was a necessary first step toward understanding. Some Sumerian planet names have survived in various forms into modern times. There go 4. Ode White Star for Venus became Ishtar in Akkadian, which influenced later names. Their Sal. Bat, Nu for Saturn, reflects its slow, stately movement across the sky over nearly 30 years. The Sumerians knew that different planets moved at different rates, that some were closer and faster, while others were distant and slower. Lunar eclipses held particular significance, and the Sumerians recorded them meticulously. Tablets describe the date, the time of night, the extent of the eclipse, its duration, and sometimes the atmospheric conditions, whether clouds interfered, whether the eclipsed moon appeared red or dark. Modern astronomers can calculate exactly when eclipses occurred in ancient times and when they compare their calculations to Sumerian records. The match is remarkable. The Sumerians recognized the Saros cycle, the period of approximately 18 years, after which eclipse patterns repeat. This knowledge allowed them to predict eclipses with reasonable accuracy. Not every eclipse, because the Saros cycle isn't perfect, and some eclipses are only visible from certain locations on Earth. But knowing that an eclipse was possible allowed priests to watch for it, to prepare appropriate rituals, to reassure the population that this frightening celestial event was understood, and not a random catastrophe. The collection of tablets known as Enuma Enu Enlil, when the gods Enu and Enlil represents the pinnacle of Mesopotamian astronomical literature. This massive work, originally comprising about 70 tablets when complete, systematically records thousands of astronomical observations and links them to earthly events. It's part astronomy, part astrology, part historical chronicle. Modern scholars sometimes dismiss ancient astrology as superstition, and certainly the belief that celestial events directly caused earthly ones was mistaken. But consider what Enuma Enu Enlil actually represents. It's a database of astronomical observations correlated with historical events over centuries. When Mars appeared in the constellation of the Scorpion, the king fell ill. When Venus rose with the sun, war broke out with the Elamites. When the moon was eclipsed in month 7, locusts destroyed the barley crop. Were the celestial events causing the earthly ones? No, but the astronomical observations themselves were real and accurate, and the systematic recording of both celestial and terrestrial events created an astronomical archive of immense historical value. By noting when an eclipse occurred alongside historical events, the tablets provide modern historians with precise chronologies. We can calculate when ancient eclipses happened, and if a tablet says a particular king was ruling during that eclipse, we know exactly when that king reigned. Moreover, you can't predict celestial omens without first predicting celestial events. To say if Venus appears in Scorpio, expect war, you must first be able to predict when Venus will appear in Scorpio. The astrological framework, however mistaken in its causal claims, drove the development of predictive astronomical models. The Sumerians needed to understand celestial mechanics well enough to forecast future positions, and that required genuine astronomical knowledge. The mathematical astronomy in these texts is sophisticated. Tablets contain calculations of lunar and solar positions using what modern scholars call arithmetic schemes, numerical procedures for calculating future positions based on past observations and mathematical patterns. These schemes used linear interpolation, periodic functions, and sophisticated arithmetic to generate predictions. One tablet, for example, contains a scheme for calculating the length of daylight throughout the year. The Sumerians recognized that days are longest at summer solstice, shortest at winter solstice, and equal at the equinoxes. But more than that, they created mathematical formulas describing how day length changed throughout the year, allowing them to calculate daylight duration for any date. Another tablet deals with the lunar months' varying length. The time from one new moon to the next isn't constant. It varies by several hours due to the elliptical nature of the moon's orbit and other factors. The Sumerians didn't know about elliptical orbits, but they observed the variation and created mathematical schemes to predict month lengths. These predictions were accurate enough for practical purposes, allowing them to create functional calendars years in advance. The concept of the zodiac dividing the sun's annual path through the stars into 12 sections originated with the Sumerians. Each section corresponded to 1 month, and the constellations that marked these sections became the signs of the zodiac. We still recognize Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on. This wasn't arbitrary division. It was a practical way of tracking the sun's position relative to the stars throughout the year, which in turn allowed tracking of seasons. Sumerian astronomers understood the concept of the ecliptic, the apparent path the sun follows through the stars over the course of a year, which is actually Earth's orbital plane projected onto the celestial sphere. They recognized that the moon and planets also move close to this same path. They didn't know why that required understanding that all planets orbit the sun in roughly the same plane, but they observed the pattern accurately. Time-keeping through stellar observations was fundamental to Sumerian civilization. Rising of certain stars signaled the start of agricultural seasons. The flooding of rivers could be anticipated by watching which stars appeared at dawn. Religious festivals were timed by stellar positions. The entire rhythm of Sumerian life synchronized to celestial events, and astronomical observation was therefore of immense practical importance. The long view is perhaps what impresses most about Sumerian astronomy. These were multi-generational observation projects. A priest observing Venus in 2000 BCE was comparing his observations to records made by priests decades or centuries earlier. He knew his own observations would be preserved for priests decades or centuries in the future. This institutional continuity, this commitment to accumulating knowledge across generations, this patience to observe patterns that might only become clear after lifetimes of data collection, this represents scientific thinking in its essence. Individual scribes left their marks on astronomical tablets. Colophons, the ancient equivalent of footnotes, sometimes name the scribe who wrote the tablet, the date it was written, which series it belongs to, and occasionally personal notes. Tablet of Nabu Ahi-Ariba, scribe of Enuma Anu-Enlil. May he who comes after me not curse my work. This scribe, whose name survived 4,000 years, knew his observations would be read by successors, hoped his work would prove useful, asked for the respect of future astronomers. Modern astronomers studying ancient records can verify Sumerian observations with computer models that calculate planetary positions for any date in history. The fact that Sumerian observations match these calculations observations made without telescopes, without photography, without any instrument more sophisticated than graduated measuring sticks and water clocks, testifies to the patience, precision, and skill of ancient observers. What remains in the untranslated astronomical tablets? Thousands exist. Most are probably routine observations, nightly records of planetary positions, lunar phase tracking, standard reference data, but some might contain observations of unusual events, comets, meteor showers, novae stars that suddenly brighten, the appearance of bright objects that modern astronomers might be able to identify and date precisely if only we knew what the tablets said. Some might contain more sophisticated mathematical schemes that we haven't yet discovered. Perhaps different methods for calculating planetary positions, perhaps longer-term cycles that required centuries of observation to detect. Perhaps observational data that would be valuable for modern research, ancient astronomy, helping modern astronomy, knowledge preserved in clay serving a purpose the original observers never imagined. The tablets keep their secrets patiently. The mathematics describing celestial motions remains true, whether read or not. The observations recorded 4,000 years ago still describe real events. Venus really did appear where the tablet says it appeared. The moon really was eclipsed on that date. Jupiter really did move into that constellation. The data waits, verified by the universe itself, ready to speak to anyone with the knowledge to understand its language. But the Sumerians didn't only turn their observational skills toward the distant heavens. They also looked closely at the human body, at disease and suffering, and applied the same systematic approach to healing that they brought to mathematics and astronomy. Their medical knowledge, preserved in another category of tablets, reveals yet another dimension of this remarkable civilization's sophistication. Section 5. Medical Knowledge. Among the clay tablets waiting in museum storage are medical texts that reveal the Sumerians practiced sophisticated medicine, empirical, detailed, surprisingly modern in approach. These aren't collections of magical spells meant to drive away demons, though those exist too. These are practical medical texts, symptom descriptions, treatment protocols, pharmaceutical recipes, surgical procedures. The Sumerians observed illness, tried treatments, recorded what worked, and passed that knowledge forward. They were, in their own way, practicing evidence-based medicine 4,000 years before that term was coined. The oldest known medical text comes from Nippur, dated to approximately 2100 BCE. It's fragmentary, the tablet is damaged, portions lost to time, but what remains is remarkable. No prayers, no incantations, no appeals to gods or demons, just recipes. 15 prescriptions for treating various ailments, each one specifying ingredients, preparation methods, and application techniques. One prescription reads, in translation, pulverize the skin of a pear tree and the plant moon. Infuse it in beer. Let the man drink. Another instructs grind to powder the seeds of the carpenter plant, the gum resin and thyme. Dissolve in beer and let the man drink. Yet another prescribes a poultice mix salt, alkali, and mustard and pour it on the wound. These aren't random ingredients thrown together in hope. They represent accumulated knowledge about which plants and minerals had therapeutic effects. Some of these ingredients contain compounds that modern pharmacology recognizes as medically active. Thyme, for instance, has antiseptic properties. Salt and alkali together create a drawing agent useful for cleaning wounds. The moon plant, though its exact identity remains debated, was likely something with analgesic or anti-inflammatory effects. Beer appears repeatedly as a carrier for medicines. This wasn't recreational beer served as a solvent, extracting active compounds from plant materials more effectively than water alone. It also made bitter medicines more palatable, increasing the likelihood patients would actually take them. The alcohol content provided mild antiseptic properties and may have helped preserve the medicines. The Sumerians didn't understand the chemistry, but they understood through observation that beer-based preparations often worked better than water-based ones. The preparation instructions show sophistication. Pulverize means grinding to fine powder, increasing surface area for extraction. Infuse means steeping in liquid to transfer compounds. Filter appears in some recipes, indicating awareness that particulate matter should be removed. These are techniques that any modern herbalist or pharmacist would recognize. Diagnostic texts, though fragmentary, reveal systematic approaches to identifying illness. These tablets organized symptoms according to a pattern that would be familiar to any medical student. Examination proceeds from head to feet, systematically noting abnormalities. If a man's head hurts him and his eyes are yellow and his urine is dark, this describes jaundice, likely from liver disease. If a man's temples throb and his breath is difficult, this might describe various cardiac or respiratory conditions. The format is consistent. If symptoms, it is disease name to treat prescription. Sometimes a prognosis is added. He will recover, or the hand of God is upon him, which appears to mean the prognosis is grave, beyond human medicine's ability to heal. Some disease names we can't translate with certainty. Others are clear enough: fever, cough, eye inflammation, skin rashes, digestive disorders. The Sumerians recognized that different symptoms clustered into distinct diseases, that similar presentations might result from different underlying causes, and that differential diagnosis distinguishing between similar appearing conditions was important for selecting appropriate treatment. Over 250 botanical drugs have been identified in Sumerian medical texts. This represents enormous accumulated knowledge about the medicinal properties of plants. The Mesopotamian environment, while challenging for agriculture, was rich in plant diversity. Scribes compiled lists of medicinal plants with their properties, creating what we'd call a Pharmacopoeia comprehensive catalogue of therapeutic substance. Willow bark appears in several prescriptions. We now know willow contains salicin, which the body converts to salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. The Sumerians didn't know the chemistry, but they knew willow bark reduced pain and fever. They discovered through observation what took us 4,000 years and sophisticated chemistry to understand. Opium poppy is mentioned, though whether they understood its powerful analgesic properties or simply used it for less potent preparations isn't clear from surviving texts. Cannabis appears in some later Mesopotamian medical texts, though its presence in Sumerian sources specifically is debated among scholars. Garlic and onions, both with genuine antimicrobial properties, appear frequently. Honey, which we now know has antiseptic qualities that make it useful for wound treatment, was used exactly that way in Sumerian medicine. The sophistication extends to preparation methods. Simple mixing is one thing, but some tablets describe more complex processes that suggest understanding of extraction chemistry without the theoretical framework. Boil until reduced by half concentrates active ingredients. Let stand overnight, then strain allows settling and separation. Mix with oil creates an ointment with different absorption properties than water-based preparations. Dosage instructions appear in some texts, though often imprecise by modern standards. Let him drink for 3 days, or apply morning and evening until the inflammation subsides. The concept that treatment should continue for a specified duration and that observation should guide decisions about stopping or continuing treatment, these represent rational therapeutic thinking. Surgical knowledge, while documented less extensively than pharmacological treatments, clearly existed. Tablets describe wound treatment protocols, cleaning wounds, closing them, applying bandages, changing dressings. Archaeological excavations have recovered surgical instruments, bronze and copper knives, forceps, probes. The care with which wounds are described and treated in the texts suggests understanding, however empirical, of infection and healing processes. One text describes treatment of a compound fracture, a broken bone that pierces the skin. The procedure involves cleaning the wound, realigning the bone, splinting, and wrapping. This represents sophisticated trauma care. Compound fractures are dangerous even with modern antibiotics. Without them, they are frequently fatal due to infection. That the Sumerians had survival protocols suggests they discovered through experience what worked. Eye diseases receive substantial attention in medical texts. Various eye inflammations, what we'd call conjunctivitis, cataracts, and other conditions are described with their treatments. Some prescriptions involve washing the eye with medicated solutions. Others apply salves. The delicacy of the eye required careful treatment, and the texts reflect that understanding. Women's health and childbirth occupy their own category of medical texts. Pregnancy symptoms are noted. Difficult labor is addressed with various interventions. Postpartum care is described. Treatments for gynecological conditions appear, while some aspects of these texts reflect misconceptions about female anatomy inevitable given the limits of ancient anatomical knowledge. The systematic attention to women's health as a distinct medical specialty demonstrates sophisticated clinical thinking. Pediatric care also appears in medical texts. Children's diseases, different from adult ailments or presenting differently, are noted. Dosages are sometimes specified as smaller for children. The recognition that children aren't simply small adults, but have their own medical needs, represents important clinical insight. There were different types of healers in Sumerian society. The Asu was what we'd call a physician, someone who treated with physical means using medicines and procedures. The Ashipu was an exorcist priest who treated through religious rituals, driving away the demons believed to cause some illnesses. These roles weren't mutually exclusive. The same patient might see both, and some conditions were treated with both empirical medicine and ritual. What's striking about the medical texts is how much they focus on the Asu tradition, practical physical treatment, while religious explanations for disease certainly existed in Sumerian culture and magical thinking pervaded their worldview. The actual medical texts are remarkably pragmatic. They read like medical textbooks, not theology. This suggests a conceptual separation between proximate and ultimate causation. A fever might ultimately be sent by a god or demon, but proximately it presents with specific symptoms and responds to specific treatments. The physician's job was to treat the proximate condition. The priest's job was to address ultimate causes. This division of labor allowed practical medicine to develop somewhat independently from religious medicine. Evidence of medical training appears in various forms. The existence of medical textbooks, which these tablets essentially are, implies systematic teaching. References to master physicians and their students suggest apprenticeship models. The standardization of treatments across different cities implies shared medical knowledge, which requires teaching institutions or at least networks of trained practitioners. Some tablets contain what appear to be case studies, descriptions of specific patients, their symptoms, the treatments administered, and outcomes. A man came with a persistent cough and pain in his side. I gave him treatment. After 7 days, his cough lessened. After 14 days, he could work again. This is clinical documentation, the kind of record keeping that allows medicine to advance through accumulated experience. Public health concepts appear in legal texts, suggesting awareness that community health required communal action. Laws address water quality, waste disposal, and isolation of the sick in some cases. While they didn't understand germ theory, they recognized empirically that disease could spread, that sanitation mattered, and that sick people could make others sick. The limitations of Sumerian medicine must also be acknowledged. They had no understanding of internal anatomy in the way we know concept of circulation, limited knowledge of organ function, no awareness of the nervous system as we understand it. Their surgical capabilities were limited by lack of anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium, and by the absence of antiseptic technique. Many conditions they simply couldn't treat effectively. But they tried, and they recorded what worked and what didn't, building a body of medical knowledge that served their civilization for over 1,000 years. That's not primitive fumbling hats, the scientific method applied to healing before the scientific method had a name. Modern researchers studying ancient medicines occasionally find surprises. Pharmaceutical companies have discovered useful compounds by investigating traditional medicines, some with roots traceable to ancient texts. Ethnobotanists interview traditional healers who preserve knowledge passed down through generations, sometimes ultimately deriving from ancient sources. The Sumerian medical tablets represent one of the earliest links in that chain of medical knowledge. What lies in the untranslated medical tablets? thousands exist. Most are probably variant versions of known texts, or prescriptions for common ailments using familiar ingredients. But some might contain unique knowledge, a particularly effective treatment for a specific condition, an unusual preparation method, observations about disease progression that could be valuable even now, plant species whose identity we could determine and whose medicinal properties we could test. Some might contain medical wisdom that was lost as Sumerian civilization declined, knowledge that later cultures didn't preserve because they didn't recognize its value. Medicine is cumulative. Each generation should ideally preserve all previous discoveries while adding new ones. But history is messy. Knowledge gets lost in wars, through neglect, when languages die and texts go untranslated. Perhaps somewhere in a museum storage room, on a tablet photographed, but not yet studied, is a remedy that could inspire modern medicine. Perhaps a plant preparation that, when analyzed chemically, reveals a useful compound. Perhaps an observation about human health that, recognized and properly investigated, illuminates something we're still trying to understand. The tablets wait. The medical knowledge they contain was valid when recorded real patients treated with real medicines, some of which worked and some of which didn't, all of it documented by physicians trying to heal. That knowledge doesn't spoil with time. Chemistry doesn't change. Human physiology doesn't fundamentally alter over mere millennia. What worked then might work now, if only we could read what they wrote. A Sumerian physician, 4,000 years ago, faced with a suffering patient, tried everything they knew to help. Sometimes they succeeded, sometimes they failed. But they learned, and they wrote down what they learned, hoping their knowledge would help future physicians treat future patients. We are those future physicians, and some of what they wanted to teach us remains unread, waiting for someone with the time and knowledge to listen. But the Sumerians didn't just record practical knowledge, mathematics for building, astronomy for calendars, medicine for healing. They also recorded something more fundamental: their souls. Their literature, myths, poetry, and deepest beliefs were pressed into clay with the same care given to accounting ledgers and medical prescriptions. And in those literary texts, we find not just historical artifacts, but genuine literature works that move us, challenge us, speak to us across 4,000 years with undiminished power. Section 6, the literary texts. When scholars finally translated Sumerian literary tablets, they discovered something unexpected: a people who wrote with beauty, humor, and profound psychological insight. These weren't dry historical chronicles or stiff religious formulas. These were works of genuine literature poetry that moved the heart, stories that explored the deepest questions of human existence, characters who felt joy and suffered grief in ways that resonate across 4 millennia, as if written yesterday. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as the oldest great work of literature in human history, though the most famous version is the later Akkadian text discovered in Ashurbanipal's library. The story originated in Sumerian. Fragments of 5 separate Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh have been recovered, each telling different episodes of his legendary life. These weren't merely adventure tales, though adventure fills their lines. They were profound explorations of mortality, friendship, the limits of human power, and the search for meaning in a world where death comes for everyone. Gilgamesh begins as a tyrant, a king who abuses his power, who takes what he wants without regard for his subjects' suffering. The gods create Enkidu, a wild man, raised among animals to challenge him. They fight, and in fighting discover mutual respect. They become friends, brothers in all but blood. Together, they accomplish heroic deeds. They journey to the cedar forest and slay its guardian Humbaba. They kill the bull of heaven sent to destroy Uruk. But then Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh, who has faced monsters and gods, who has never known defeat, confronts the one enemy no strength can overcome. His grief is devastating. The tablets describe him weeping over his friend's body, refusing to allow burial until maggots appear in Enkidu's nausea detail, so visceral, so specific, so grounded in the physical reality of death that you feel the weight of Gilgamesh's denial, his desperate hope that somehow his friend might still wake. What follows is perhaps literature's first great exploration of grief. Gilgamesh, terrified by his first real understanding of mortality, sets out to find immortality. He seeks Utnapishtim, the one human granted eternal life after surviving the Great Flood. The journey is perilous. Gilgamesh crosses mountains whose peaks touch heaven, passes through 12 leagues of darkness, reaches the waters of death that only Utnapishtim's boatman can navigate. He finds Utnapishtim, and the immortal man tells him the truth: immortality was a unique gift, given once, never to be repeated. The gods will not grant it to Gilgamesh. Death is humanity's fate. But Utnapishtim offers a test. If Gilgamesh can stay awake for 7 days and nights, he'll reveal a secret. Gilgamesh, exhausted from his journey, immediately falls asleep. He sleeps for 7 days. When he wakes, Utnapishtim has baked 7 loaves of bread, one for each day, each in a different state of decay, the oldest mouldy and hard, the newest fresh. The bread proves Gilgamesh slept. He couldn't even conquer sleep, the little brother of death. How could he hope to conquer death itself? Taking pity, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh of a plant growing at the bottom of the sea that restores youth. Gilgamesh dives deep, finds it, resurfaces triumphant. He plans to bring it back to Uruk, to test it on an old man before using it himself. But while bathing in a pool, a serpent smells the plant's sweetness, steals it, and slithers away, shedding its skin in the process, which is why, the story explains, snakes can renew themselves while humans cannot. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk empty-handed. The story ends where it began, with Gilgamesh in his city. But he has changed. He accepts his mortality. He finds meaning not in living forever, but in what he built, what he accomplished, the walls of Uruk that will stand after he's gone. The story concludes by describing the city's magnificence, as if to say this is immortality, the things we create that outlive us, the legacy we leave. This is sophisticated psychological literature. It understands that grief changes us, that confronting mortality is essential to finding meaning, that acceptance rather than denial brings peace. Across 4,000 years, Gilgamesh's journey remains relevant because the questions he asks: why must we die? How do we face loss? What makes a life meaningful? These are eternal human questions. Every person who has lost someone they love understands Gilgamesh's grief. Every person who has feared death understands his desperate quest. Every person who has made peace with mortality understands his final acceptance. The Sumerians also wrote love poetry of surprising beauty and frankness. Sacred marriage texts, written from the perspective of the goddess Inanna and her consort Dumuzi, celebrate physical and emotional love with a directness that would make some modern readers blush. These weren't pornographic, they were sacred, performed as part of ritual, but they were also genuinely sensual, joyful, unashamed in their celebration of desire and pleasure. One famous text has Inanna singing "My vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. My untilled land lies follow. As for me, Inanna, who will plough my vulva, who will plough my high field, who will plough my wet ground?" Dumuzi responds, "Great lady, the king will plough your vulva." "I, Dumuzi the king, will plough your vulva." And Inanna replies joyfully, "Plough my vulva, man of my heart." This is not subtle metaphor made prurient by modern interpretation. This is deliberate, explicit, celebrating sexuality as something sacred and joyous. Other love poems are gentler, more tender. The honeyman sweetens me always. My lord, the honeyman of the gods, he is the one my womb loves best. The female voice is prominent in Sumerian love poetry, expressing desire, making choices, celebrating pleasure. These poems suggest a culture more comfortable with female sexuality than many later civilizations. But Sumerian literature also knew sorrow. The Lament for Ur, written after the city's destruction by Elamite invaders around 2000 BCE, is one of the most moving elegies ever composed. It personifies the city itself as mourning its own destruction. The city is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. Its walls have been breached. The dead lie in the streets. The city is destroyed by wind, by water. Its people have been scattered. The foreigner has made homes in our sacred places. The enemy walks in our temples. The city weeps for itself. The mother weeps for her children. The land weeps for its people. This isn't metaphor. This describes real trauma, real loss. Was destroyed. Its people were killed or enslaved. The survivors wrote this lament, transforming their grief into poetry, preserving their pain and their love for their city in clay that would outlast the rubble. Reading it now, you feel that grief. The specifics are ancient, but grief itself is timeless. Every war refugee, every person who has lost their home, every survivor of destruction understands what these lines express. Hymns to gods fill many tablets, but these aren't merely ritual formulas mindlessly repeated. Some are profound theological explorations, grappling with questions of divine justice, the relationship between humans and gods, the nature of power and mercy. Others are beautiful poetry praising aspects of the natural or divine world. Still others are remarkably personal, almost conversational in tone, speaking to gods as one might speak to a powerful but approachable patron. The most famous Sumerian hymn writer was Enheduanna, high priestess of the moon, god Nanna, Ur, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, who lived around 2300 BCE. She is the first author in human history whose name, biography, and actual words we possess. Earlier texts exist, but they are anonymous. Enheduanna signed her work, and her personality comes through clearly across 4,000 years. Her hymn to Inanna is both religious praise and personal autobiography. She describes her devotion to the goddess, her service as high priestess, and then devastatingly her exile. Political upheaval resulted in Enheduanna being stripped of her position and driven from Ur. In the hymn, she pleads with Inanna for restoration, describing her suffering, questioning why this happened, asserting her continued faith despite apparent divine abandonment. I, Enheduanna, will recite a prayer to you, Inanna. I will give free vent to my tears like sweet beer. I will speak my prayers to you. My tears, like sweet beer, I will offer to you. I will say to you, you have exalted me, you have made me great, and now I am as one whom you have cast away. This is not formulaic religious poetry. This is a person in crisis questioning, suffering, yet maintaining faith. The hymn continues through various emotions: anger, sorrow, hope, determination, before concluding with Enheduanna's restoration to her position, which apparently did occur historically. Her works were copied and studied for 500 years after her death, making her Ancient Mesopotamia's best-selling author. That a woman in the 23rd century BCE could achieve such prominence as a writer suggests Sumerian culture, for all its patriarchal elements, created space for female intellectual achievement. Wisdom literature, proverbs, and instructions for proper living reveals Sumerian values and humor. Some proverbs are practical: a loving heart maintains a family, a hateful heart destroys a family. Others are wryly observant: he who eats too much cannot sleep. Some express frustration with human nature: you can have a lord, you can have a king, but the man to fear is the tax collector. Educational texts, especially those describing student life, are surprisingly funny. The composition known as School Days presents a student's typical day at the Eduba, and it reads like a comedy about educational incompetence. The student wakes late, hurries to school, gets caned for tardiness, is caned for talking, caned for standing up, caned for walking outside, caned for poor handwriting. His father, hearing of these troubles, invites the headmaster to dinner, lavishes him with gifts, and suddenly, miraculously, the teacher praises the student's work. This is satire, social commentary wrapped in humor. It mocks the education system's reliance on corporal punishment, while also joking about bribery and favoritism. 4,000 years later, students still complain about strict teachers, and parents still worry about their children's education. The specifics change, the human dynamics remain constant. Dispute poems represent another literary form, debates between personified concepts. Summer and winter argue about which season contributes more to human welfare. Hoe and plough debate which tool is more essential. Bird and fish argue about which provides greater benefit. These aren't just entertainment, they are rhetorical exercises, teaching argumentation and wit while exploring philosophical questions about value and importance. These poems are genuinely clever. Each side presents legitimate arguments. The bird boasts of flying free, seeing all lands, bringing messages. The fish counters that he provides essential food, that fishermen depend on him for survival, that beauty means nothing to the hungry. The arguments build, becoming more sophisticated until a divine judge finally declares a winner. Students presumably studied these texts not just to learn writing, but to learn how to construct arguments, how to think critically, how to see multiple perspectives. The Sumerian king list presents itself as historical chronicle, a list of all rulers from the beginning of time through the historical period, but it's actually a fascinating mix of mythology, legend, and genuine history. It begins with kings before the flood who ruled for impossibly long periods. Ululim ruled for 28,800 years. Aloljar ruled for 36,000 years. 8 kings total, their combined reigns stretching over 240,000 years. Then comes the flood, and after the flood, kingship descended from heaven again. But now the reign lengths, while still impossibly long, begin to decrease. Etana ruled for 1,500 years. Eventually, the list reaches historical periods where reign lengths become plausible. Gilgamesh ruled for 126 years. By the time we reach fully historical kings whose reigns we can verify from other sources, the numbers are realistic. Namu ruled for 18 years. What are we to make of this? The Sumerians weren't stupid. They knew people don't live 28,800 years. So what does the king list represent? Perhaps early kings were actually dynasties, and the years represent the dynasty's total rule. Perhaps they are symbolic, representing different eras of civilization. Perhaps they encode information we don't understand. Or perhaps the Sumerians simply created a narrative connecting their historical kings to a mythological past, giving their civilization cosmic significance. What's clear is that they cared about history, about preserving an accurate record once they entered the historical period, about connecting present rulers to a continuous tradition stretching back to when kingship descended from heaven. They wanted legitimacy, continuity, meaning. The king list provided that, creating a narrative framework that encompassed both mythical origins and documented history. Myths about gods reveal how Sumerians understood cosmic order and human place within it. The creation myth has the gods creating humans from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god. This explains human nature were made of earth, but also contain divine essence, were mortal but also capable of thinking, creating, aspiring to transcend our earthly limits. The flood myth, which predates the biblical narrative, tells of the gods deciding to destroy humanity because we're too noisy, we disturb their sleep. But Enki, god of wisdom, warns his favorite human, Utnapishtim, who builds a boat and saves his family and animals. After the flood, the gods realize they need humans who will make offerings, do work, maintain temples, so they make peace with humanity, granting Utnapishtim immortality as apology. This isn't just an entertaining story. It's theology. It explores divine nature. Gods are powerful but flawed. Human purpose we exist to serve, but we're also necessary. And the relationship between mortal and immortal, we can't be gods, but gods need us. These are sophisticated ideas about cosmic order, presented in narrative form accessible to anyone. Inanna's descent to the underworld is perhaps the most psychologically complex Sumerian myth. Inanna, goddess of love and war, decides to visit the underworld ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. She passes through 7 gates, at each one surrendering an article of clothing or jewelry, until she arrives naked and powerless before her sister's throne. Ereshkigal kills her. Inanna hangs dead on a hook for 3 days. The world above withers. Without Inanna nothing grows, no babies are conceived, life itself begins to fail. The gods intervene, sending rescuers to retrieve Inanna, but underworld law says anyone who enters must remain unless they send a substitute. Inanna returns to the world, searching for someone to take her place. She finds her husband Dumuzi sitting on her throne, apparently unconcerned about her death. In rage, she sends him to the underworld as her substitute. This myth explores death and rebirth, descent into darkness and return to light. The cost of transformation. Inanna had to die to be reborn. She had to surrender everything: power, beauty, clothing, pride to understand the underworld and her sister's realm. The story resonates as psychological allegory. Sometimes we must descend into darkness, strip away everything we are, die to our old selves, before we can return transformed. The translation of these literary texts presents special challenges. Sumerian poetry uses wordplay, alliteration, puns, metrical patterns, all of which are nearly impossible to preserve in translation. Much of the beauty is lost when ancient Sumerian becomes modern English. The metaphors draw from a world we don't know. What does it mean to be like a young gazelle in the desert? We can imagine, but we have never seen wild gazelles in the Mesopotamian desert. We don't know their behavior, their significance in Sumerian culture, the specific associations they would have evoked. Yet even imperfectly translated, even stripped of wordplay and cultural references we can't fully recover, Sumerian literature retains power. The emotions are real, the questions are timeless. Gilgamesh's grief, Enheduanna's crisis of faith, the love poetry's joy, the lament for Ur's sorrow, these speak directly to human hearts across every barrier of time and culture. Reading these texts, you realize the Sumerians were fully human in every way that matters. They loved as we love. They grieved as we grieve. They wondered about life's meaning, feared death, celebrated joy, created beauty, asked unanswerable questions about gods and fate and purpose. 4,000 years collapse. The clay tablet becomes transparent, and through it you see another person, ancient but recognizable, speaking across time. How many more literary works wait unread? Hundreds of literary tablets sit untranslated. Most are probably versions of known texts, additional copies of Gilgamesh stories, more hymns in familiar styles, more proverbs expressing similar values. But some might be unique. A poem by an unknown author whose voice deserves to be heard. A myth that sheds new light on Sumerian theology. A story that achieves what great literature always achieves, illuminating the human condition in ways that transcend its specific time and place. Somewhere in a museum storage room might be the Sumerian equivalent of the Iliadan epic we have never read, comparable in quality to anything in the ancient world, waiting for someone with time and expertise to translate it. Or perhaps dozens of shorter works, each adding texture and depth to our understanding of Sumerian culture. Or perhaps love poems that would make us laugh or weep, wisdom that would make us nod in recognition, stories that would lodge in our memories alongside stories we learned in childhood. The tablets wait. The literature they contain hasn't aged. Beauty doesn't decay. Truth doesn't expire. A poem that moved hearts 4,000 years ago will move hearts today, if only someone will read it aloud again, give it voice, let it speak. But not all Sumerian tablets fit neatly into categories like mathematics, astronomy, medicine, or literature. Some tablets puzzle scholars, seeming to describe knowledge the Sumerians shouldn't have had, or referencing concepts that don't match our understanding of their capabilities. These anomalous tablets raise questions about what we know, what we assume, and what we might be missing in our interpretation of an ancient culture separated from us by an unbridgeable gulf of time and context. Section 7. The Anomalous Tablets. Among Sumerian records are tablets that puzzle scholars, documents that seem to describe knowledge they shouldn't have had, or reference concepts that don't match our understanding of their capabilities. These aren't necessarily evidence of ancient aliens or lost super civilizations. The explanations are almost certainly more mundane, but they remind us that we're looking at an ancient culture through a distorted lens, separated by 4,000 years, interpreting texts in a language that died 2 millennia before Christ, trying to understand a worldview fundamentally different from our own. The danger here is twofold. On one hand, we risk exaggerating Sumerian achievements, reading modern knowledge into ancient texts, seeing sophistication that isn't really there. On the other hand, we risk dismissing genuine anomalies out of hand, assuming that anything unexpected must be either misinterpreted or fraudulent. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between credulity and dismissiveness. Let us be clear about the scholarly position the vast majority of professional archaeologists, historians, and linguists reject sensational claims about ancient civilizations possessing technology comparable to modern levels. There is no credible evidence that the Sumerians had electricity, computers, airplanes, or any other advanced technology. The burden of proof for extraordinary claims is extraordinary, and that burden has not been met. But within the boundaries of responsible scholarship, some tablets do raise interesting questions. References to advanced metallurgy appear in some texts. Tablets describe recipes for creating specific metal alloys with what seem like unusually precise temperature requirements and ingredient ratios. One text specifies that copper and tin must be combined in particular proportions, heated to specific temperatures, cooled at controlled rates, then reheated and quenched. This produces hardened bronze suitable for tools and weapons. The question is whether this represents genuine understanding of metallurgical chemistry or simply accumulated empirical knowledge. Did they understand on a theoretical level what was happening when they combined metals and heated them? Or did they simply know through generations of trial and error that following these steps produced better bronze? Modern metallurgists looking at these recipes sometimes express surprise at how sophisticated the processes are, how close they come to optimal techniques, even by modern standards. The truth is probably that the Sumerians were extremely skilled practical metallurgists who learned through observation and experimentation what worked, without necessarily understanding the underlying chemistry. They knew that hotter fires produced different results. They knew that cooling rates affected hardness. They knew that certain combinations of metals performed better than others. This is impressive practical knowledge, even if it's not theoretical chemistry. Chemical processes described in some tablets also raise questions. Recipes for making glass appear in later Mesopotamian texts, but references in Sumerian tablets suggest earlier knowledge. Glass making requires heating silica sand with various additives to temperatures around 1500 degrees Celsius. The Sumerians clearly could make glass beads. Archaeological evidence confirms this. But some texts seem to describe more complex processes that scholars debate interpreting. Pigment preparations are another area of chemical sophistication. Creating certain colors required multi-step chemical processes. Egyptian blue, for instance, requires heating a mixture of silica, lime, copper, and an alkali at specific temperatures. Sumerian texts describe creating blue pigments, and while we can't always be certain which specific compound they are describing, the level of process detail suggests substantial chemical knowledge. Some tablets appear to describe distillation processes heating liquids to separate components based on boiling points. This would be sophisticated chemistry. However, the interpretation is debated. The text might be describing something simpler that's been mistranslated or misunderstood. Without physical evidence of distillation apparatus from Sumerian contexts, we can't be certain what these texts really describe. The so-called Baghdad battery often comes up in discussions of anomalous ancient artifacts, though it's important to note this isn't actually Sumerianites, much later, Parthian, dating to around 200 BCE. The artifact is a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or wine, it can produce a small electric current. The question is, was it actually used as a battery? If so, for what purpose? Electroplating jewelry is one hypothesis. You could deposit a thin layer of gold onto copper objects using electrochemistry. But there's no direct evidence of this use. The scholarly consensus is that it probably wasn't a battery, that it served some other purpose we don't fully understand, or that the apparent electrical capacity is an accidental property of its construction. Why mention it in a discussion of Sumerian tablets? Because some writers have suggested that Sumerian texts reference similar devices. This is highly speculative. No Sumerian-era batteries have been found. The textual references cited are subject to multiple interpretations. It's an example of how easy it is to read modern knowledge into ancient texts. When we're dealing with translation, ambiguities, and cultural context we don't fully grasp. Tablets dealing with selective breeding show the Sumerians understood inherited traits and could manipulate them. They bred livestock for specific characteristics: larger sheep, more productive milk cows, faster horses. They understood that offspring tend to resemble parents, that breeding the best specimens together tends to produce superior offspring. This is observational genetics, the kind of animal husbandry that farmers have practiced for millennia. But some of the language used in these texts is remarkably precise in describing inheritance patterns. They recognized that sometimes traits skip a generation, that breeding related animals sometimes produces defects, that vigor can be improved by bringing in unrelated breeding stock. These are sophisticated observations, even if they're not expressed in terms of genes and chromosomes. Plant hybridization texts show similar understanding. The Sumerians knew that crossing different varieties of grain could produce offspring with characteristics of both parents. Date palm cultivation tablets describe hand pollinating female trees with pollen from male trees to ensure fruit production, and selecting superior males for this purpose. This is applied botany at a high level. No one suggests the Sumerians understood DNA, but they clearly understood heredity in practical terms and could manipulate it to their benefit. The question is whether we're underestimating how much they understood theoretically versus how much was pure empiricism. Long-distance trade records sometimes describe places and goods from surprisingly far away. Tablets from mentioned trade with the Indus Valley Civilization, modern Pakistan, and northwestern India, over 1,500 miles distant. Items from Afghanistan, Anatolia, Egypt, the Persian Gulf, all appear in Sumerian inventories. Lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone, came exclusively from mines in Afghanistan. That the Sumerians could acquire it regularly implies extensive trade networks. Some texts describe foreign lands with surprising geographical accuracy. Distances are given. Landmarks are noted. Trade routes are outlined. How much did the Sumerians know about world geography? Certainly they knew their immediate region well. But did merchants travel to these distant lands personally, or did goods pass through multiple intermediaries, with information becoming garbled along the way? Occasional references appear to places that scholars can't identify. Are these real locations we haven't found, mythological places, or simply places whose names changed and whose identifications we've lost? Without additional evidence, we can't be certain. Star charts present their own mysteries. We've discussed how the Sumerians carefully observed the heavens and catalogued constellations. Most of their constellations are identifiable. We can match their descriptions to star patterns we still recognize. But some aren't. They describe constellations or celestial objects we can't identify with certainty. Are these stars or constellations that have since moved or changed? Proper motion, the movement of stars across the sky over long periods, is real, but generally too slow to make much difference over only 4,000 years. Are they planets misidentified as stars? Are they comets or other temporary celestial phenomena? Are the descriptions inaccurate, or is our interpretation wrong? One tablet describes what sounds like a nova star that suddenly brightens dramatically. If we could identify which star it was describing, we could date the observation precisely, as modern astronomy knows when historical novae occurred. But the description is ambiguous, and several interpretations are possible. References to very long time periods appear in various contexts. The king lists pre-flood reigns of tens of thousands of years are clearly mythological, but some astronomical texts discuss cycles of thousands of years. Some mathematical texts use numbers representing enormous time spans. Are these real observations of very long periodic cycles? Are they theoretical calculations? Are they symbolic or mythological numbers? The concept of deep time, that Earth is very old, is often credited to 18th and 19th century geologists. But did the Sumerians have some notion of this? Their myths speak of eras before humans, of cosmic cycles, of ages of the world. How literally did they understand these timescales? We can't know for certain. Time perception is cultural. The Sumerians might have thought about time very differently than we do. Mythological time and historical time might not have been clearly separated in their worldview. What reads to us like a claim about actual elapsed years might have been understood by them as something else entirely. Some tablets contain diagrams, geometric shapes, architectural plans, sketches of objects. Most are straightforward plans for buildings, designs for irrigation works, geometric problems illustrated visually. But occasionally there's a diagram that scholars can't interpret with confidence. Is it a machine, a religious symbol, an astronomical device, an architectural detail from an unfamiliar structure? Without context, without accompanying text that clearly explains what we're looking at, interpretation becomes guesswork. We see something unfamiliar and try to fit it into categories we understand. But maybe it represents something that had meaning in Sumerian culture that we simply can't access anymore. The scholarly tension around these anomalous texts is real and important. Popular culture loves mysteries and tends towards sensationalism. Ancient astronaut theories, lost super civilizations, ancient high technology, these ideas sell books and television shows. They also do real damage, undermining serious archaeology and creating false narratives that disrespect ancient peoples by suggesting they couldn't have achieved what they clearly did without outside help. Professional scholars push back against this, sometimes perhaps too hard, dismissing anything unusual as either fraud or misinterpretation. The responsible middle position is to acknowledge genuine puzzles while maintaining appropriate skepticism about extraordinary claims. What might we be missing in our interpretations? Context, for one thing. When you read a text from a culture 4,000 years dead, you're missing enormous amounts of assumed knowledge. If a Sumerian text says prepare it in the usual way, what's the usual way? Everyone at the time would have known. We don't, so we guess, and maybe we guess wrong. Technical terminology is another issue. Every field develops specialized vocabulary. Sumerian scribes writing for other scribes would use technical terms, assuming their readers understood them. We're not their intended audience. We might completely misunderstand what they are describing because we don't know what their technical vocabulary actually referred to. Metaphor and literalism is yet another problem. When is a text being literal and when metaphorical? Modern readers can usually tell because we share cultural context with modern writers. Ancient texts, much harder. Something that sounds impossible might be metaphorical. Something that sounds metaphorical might be literal. We can't always tell which is which. Copyist errors compound the problem. Most surviving tablets are copies, sometimes copies of copies. Each time a scribe copied a text, there was potential for errors. A misread sign, a word accidentally skipped, a passage the scribe didn't fully understand and therefore copied incorrectly. Some anomalies might simply be scribal errors that have fooled us into thinking the original text said something it didn't. Damaged tablets make interpretation even harder. When half the text is missing, we reconstruct based on context and parallel texts. But sometimes we reconstruct wrongly. What seemed anomalous might have been perfectly clear if we had the complete text. And then there's the humbling reality. We might simply be wrong about some fundamental assumptions. Every generation of scholars thinks they understand ancient cultures better than previous generations, and they're usually right up to a point. But future generations look back and find errors, misconceptions, entire frameworks that were mistaken. We're not exempt from this pattern. Future scholars will find mistakes in our current understanding. So what should we make of anomalous tablets? We should study them carefully, without prejudgment. We should remain open to surprises while maintaining rigorous evidential standards. We should admit when we don't understand something rather than forcing interpretations. We should be willing to say this is puzzling and we're not sure what it means rather than either exaggerating it into impossible claims or dismissing it as obviously wrong. The Sumerians were sophisticated, intelligent, observant, creative people. They achieved remarkable things with the tools and knowledge available to them. They didn't need electricity or computers to build ziggurats, develop mathematics, create literature, or observe the stars. Respecting their actual achievements is more important than inventing imaginary ones. But respecting their achievements also means taking seriously what their texts actually say, even when it puzzles us. It means admitting that we don't understand everything, that translation is imperfect, that cultural context is partially lost, that we're dealing with a civilization that thought differently than we do. The anomalous tablets keep their secrets not through deliberate obscurity, but through the vast gulf of time and culture that separates us. Each generation of scholars brings new tools, better translations, new archaeological discoveries, scientific techniques for analyzing artifacts, computer databases allowing pattern recognition across thousands of texts. each generation understands a bit more, and each generation discovers that some of what the previous generation thought they understood was mistaken. This is how knowledge advances through successive approximation, getting closer to truth without ever quite reaching perfect certainty. The tablets wait. They have waited 4,000 years. They can wait longer. Eventually, perhaps, we'll understand what puzzled us, or perhaps future scholars, with tools and knowledge we can't imagine, will look back at our confusion and wonder how we missed what was obvious all along. But the most human documents are often the most ordinary. Grand temples and epic literature impress us, but it's in the mundane records, the shopping lists, the complaint letters, the marriage contracts that we find the Sumerians not as mysterious ancients, but as people recognizable across the millennia, dealing with the same daily concerns that occupy us now. Section 8, Everyday Life in the Tablets. The most human records are often the most ordinary shopping lists, complaint letters, marriage contracts, recipes. These reveal the Sumerians not as mysterious ancients or legendary civilization builders, but as people who worried about rent and argued with neighbors and loved their children and complained about the quality of copper they'd purchased from a merchant who promised better. Tens of thousands of economic tablets survive. These are the backbone of Sumerian archives, the documents that accumulated year after year in temple storerooms and palace archives and merchant offices. Sales receipts for everything imaginable: 3 sheep purchased from Nammu, price 2 shekels of silver. Barley, 40 bushels, delivered to the temple storehouse. 1 bronze knife, payment for services rendered. These aren't exciting. They are not literature or scientific discoveries or religious revelations. They are bookkeeping, but in aggregate, they reveal how Sumerian society actually functioned. They show us prices, wages, what people bought and sold, what they valued, how the economy operated from day to day. 1 tablet records the purchase of a house, the buyer's name, the seller's name, the price paid, the house's location, its size, the names of witnesses who observed the transaction, unremarkably warranty clause. If the house proved to have structural defects not disclosed by the seller, the sale could be voided. 4,000 years ago, someone thought to protect themselves contractually against being sold a lemon of a house. Buyer beware was evidently already a concern. Loan documents are common. Enheduanna has borrowed from the merchant Ea-Nasir 10 shekels of silver to be repaid after harvest, with interest at the rate of 33% annually. If payment is not made, Enheduanna will forfeit his field. The terms are explicit, the consequences clear. Credit was essential in an agricultural economy where income came in lumps at harvest time, but expenses occurred year-round. Loans bridged that gap at a price. Interest rates recorded in tablets allow economic historians to track lending conditions across centuries. Rates varied based on security offered, the borrower's reputation, economic conditions, and the type of loan. Personal loans generally carried higher rates than commercial loans backed by assets. This is economics in practice, not theory, the market determining prices based on risk and supply and demand. But perhaps the most famous everyday tablet is a customer complaint. A merchant named Ea-Nasir sold copper to a customer named Nani. The copper, according to Nani, was poor quality, not the fine copper Ea-Nasir had promised. Nani was furious, and rather than just complaining verbally, Nani wrote a letter. and not just any letter, but a masterpiece of passive-aggressive complaint that would fit perfectly on a modern internet review site. The tablet, translated, reads Tel Ea-Nasir sends the following message: when you came, you said to me as follows: I will give Jimmel sin fine quality copper ingots. You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger, and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. What do you take me for, that you treat me with such contempt? I have sent gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money deposited with you, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back to me empty-handed several times, and that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Telman who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver, which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way, while I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper, and Sumiabum has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper, apart from what we both have had written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Samas. How have you treated me for that copper? You have withheld my money bag from me in enemy territory. It is now up to you to restore to me in full. This is not the dry language of official documents. This is personal outrage. Nani has been wronged, his dignity offended, his business partners treated with disrespect, his messengers sent away empty-handed. The sarcasm drips from every line. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Telman who has treated me in this way? You alone. The rhetorical question hangs like an indictment. And the truly wonderful thing? This tablet was found in Ea-Nasir's house, along with several other complaint tablets from other customers. Ea-Nasir apparently kept the complaints, filing them away. Was he a terrible merchant who generated justified complaints and kept them as some kind of twisted trophy? Was he actually in the right, but dealing with unreasonable customers, and he kept the complaints as evidence? We'll never know, but 4,000 years later, Ea-Nasir's reputation as a possibly shady copper dealer is immortalized in clay, preserved for eternity, by the very complaints he received. Legal disputes fill tablets, showing Sumerians loved their litigation. Property boundary disputes were particularly common. The field of Lugal-Amaku borders the field of Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu claims that Lugal-Amaku's irrigation ditch encroaches on his land by 3 cubits. Lugal-Amaku denies this. Surveyors were called. The fields were measured. The surveyors determined that the ditch encroaches by 2 cubits. Lugal-Amaku must move his ditch and compensate Ur-Nammu for 3 years' reduced yield. This is a complete court case in miniature. Claim, counterclaim, evidence, expert witnesses, judgment, remedy. The justice system at work, settling a dispute between neighbours over a few feet of land. It mattered to them. Their livelihoods depended on field productivity, and every cubit mattered. Theft accusations generated trials. Lal stands accused of stealing a bronze vessel from the temple. He denies the charge. 3 witnesses testify they saw him near the temple on the day of the theft. Lal has no alibi. He has a reputation for dishonesty. He is found guilty and must pay restitution of twice the vessel's value plus a fine to the temple. Evidence-based justice, reputation considered, punishment proportional. Inheritance conflicts sometimes got complicated. Ninbara died leaving 2 sons from his first wife, 1 son from his second wife. one daughter from his first wife, and adopted son. His estate consists of a house, 3 fields, 200 sheep, 50 goats, various household goods. The law requires the first son inherit a double portion. The second wife's son claims his mother should have been considered the primary wife because the first wife had died. The daughter claims she should inherit equally with her brothers. The adopted son claims equal rights. The judge determines. These cases could go on for pages with testimony from family members, neighbors, servants, business associates. Everyone had a stake. The judge had to balance legal principles, precedent, fairness, and practical considerations. Sumerian law was complex, and inheritance was one of the most complex areas. Divorce proceedings were rarer, but thoroughly documented when they occurred. Marriage was primarily an economic partnership, and divorce meant dissolving that partnership. Kanuna wishes to divorce Nen-Sa. The marriage contract specified that if Kanuna initiated divorce, Nin-Sa would retain her dowry plus 1 mina of silver compensation. Nin-Sa must return the household items that were Kanuna's family property. The children remain with Nin-Sa until they reach majority, and Kanuna must provide support. What's notable is that divorce was legal, that women had rights within the process, that contracts anticipated this possibility and specified terms in advance. Sumerian marriage wasn't indissoluble. It could end, and when it did, the law protected both parties' interests. Marriage contracts themselves are windows into family economics and social expectations. A typical contract might read Nin Shara, daughter of Namu, is given in marriage to Lugalamaku, son of Enki Mansi. Her dowry consists of 2 wool blankets, 1 bed, 3 chairs, 1 bronze mirror, 10 shekels of silver, 1 field producing 40 bushels of barley annually. Lugalamaku pledges to treat her well, to provide for her needs, to not take a second wife without her consent. If he divorces her without cause, she retains her dowry plus 10 shekels. If she initiates divorce, she forfeits the silver but retains her personal items. If either commits adultery, the penalty is everything specified, everything negotiated, everything witnessed and sealed. Marriage was serious business, affecting property rights, inheritance, family alliances, economic security. The contract protected everyone's interests and specified remedies if things went wrong. Adoption papers show that childless couples could legally adopt, that the adopted child gained full inheritance rights, that biological and adoptive families all signed agreements protecting everyone involved. Ninbara and her husband Elal have no children. They adopt Lugalamaku, son of Kanuna. Lugalamaku will inherit Ninbara and Elal's property as if born to them. He will care for them in old age. He will make offerings to their spirits after death. Kanuna relinquishes all parental rights and claims. If Ninbara and Elal subsequently have biological children, Lugalamaku retains equal inheritance rights. These adoptions were binding, generous to the adopted child, and surprisingly modern in their understanding of what constitutes family. Blood relationship mattered in Sumerian culture, but legal relationship could substitute for it. Love and obligation could be created through formal agreement. Personal letters survive, offering glimpses of relationships and concerns. A father writes to his son studying in another city, "You have been away now for 2 years. Your mother worries constantly. Please write more often. Your brother sends greetings. The barley harvest was good this year. I am sending you 10 shekels of silver for expenses. Do not spend it foolishly. Focus on your studies. Make your teachers proud. We will see you at the New Year festival. The tone is simultaneously loving and stern, worried and proud. Exactly what you'd expect from a parent whose child has gone away to school. A woman writes to her sister the baby is healthy and growing strong. She looks like you. I wish you could see her. When will you visit? Mother is well, but her back troubles her. Father sends greetings. The new neighbors are noisy. I am making inquiries about finding a different house. 4,000 years later, we read about sisters keeping in touch, about a grandmother with back pain, about noisy neighbors, and we recognize these concerns as timeless. Business correspondence reveals relationships and deals. To Ea-Nasir, the copper shipment has arrived. The quality is acceptable, though not the finest. I am sending payment as agreed. I will need another shipment of equal amount before the next new moon. Can you supply it? Also, have you any tin? The metalworkers are asking for it. Let me know prices. Trade negotiations, quality discussions, supply chain management business hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. Recipe tablets provide instructions for cooking and brewing. Beer recipes are particularly common and detailed. To make beer, grind barley. Mix with water and dates. Let stand for 3 days. Strain through basket. The liquid is beer. If you want stronger beer, use less water. If you want sweet beer, add more dates. Drink within 7 days or it turns sour. These aren't professional brewers' secrets. These are household recipes meant for domestic beer production, which was typically women's work in Sumerian households. Beer was a staple beverage, safer than water, which could carry disease, and nutritious. Everyone made beer. The tablets ensured consistent results. Bread recipes appear as well, though less commonly. This might be because bread making was so universal that recipes weren't necessary. Everyone knew how to make bread, or perhaps bread recipes weren't considered worth preserving on clay tablets. Beer recipes survived perhaps because brewing was more complex and variable, requiring recorded instructions. Medical case studies provide doctor's notes. Essentially, a man came complaining of persistent cough and pain in his side. Upon examination, his breathing was labored and he had fever. I administered treatment. After 3 days, the fever diminished. After 7 days, his cough lessened. After 14 days, he returned to work. This is clinical documentation, tracking symptoms, treatments, and outcomes, exactly what modern doctors do. Another case, a woman in her 3rd pregnancy experienced bleeding and pain. I prescribed bed rest and medicinal herbs. The bleeding stopped after 2 days. The pregnancy continued. She delivered a healthy child after the normal term. Obstetric care documented. Successful outcome noted. And unsuccessful cases to a child, age 5, suffered from flux and fever. Despite all treatments lists various remedies, the child worsened. After 9 days, the child died. The parents were grief-stricken. The honesty here is touching. The doctor tried everything, failed, acknowledged the failure and the family's grief. Ancient physicians faced the same helplessness modern doctors sometimes face when disease wins despite every effort. Religious practice, beyond grand temple rituals, appears in personal documents. Votive offerings catalogued. Nanbara dedicates to the goddess Inanna 1 silver bracelet, 1 wool shawl, 1 jar of honey, in thanksgiving for her daughter's recovery from illness. Personal devotion, gratitude expressed through gifts to the deity who supposedly intervened. Festival participation records show that religious life wasn't just priestly business. Ordinary people attended festivals, participated in processions, made offerings, celebrated holy days. One text describes preparations for the New Year festival. Each household must contribute 1 jar of beer, 2 loaves of bread, 1 sheaf of barley for the temple. Participation in the procession is required of all able-bodied adults. Children will sing the hymn to Enlil. Offerings will be presented at noon. Occupational diversity appears in tablets listing workers and their wages. Farmers, of course, were most numerous, but also scribes, smiths' copper, bronze, gold, silver, brewers, bakers, weavers, carpenters, reed workers, leather workers, fishermen, shepherds, soldiers, merchants, priests and priestesses, musicians, singers, dancers, physicians, teachers, judges, tax collectors, warehouse managers, boat builders, canal diggers, and many more specialized roles. Each occupation had its own skill set, training requirements, social status, and typical wages. A master scribe earned far more than a manual laborer. A skilled smith commanded higher wages than an unskilled porter. But even at the bottom of the wage scale, workers earned enough to survive starvation. Wages were uncommon because labor was valuable and workers could often find alternative employment. Women's economic participation is documented throughout these tablets. Women, as property owners, Nineveh daughter of Ea-Nasir owns 1 house in the merchant quarter, 2 fields near the river, shares in a trading partnership. Women as business operators, Ninsa runs a tavern. She purchased barley for brewing 40 bushels. She sold beer. Income, 32 shekels of silver. Expenses for supplies and wages, 18 shekels. Profit, 14 shekels. Female scribes appear occasionally in the records. Most scribes were men, but the existence of female scribes at all indicates that education wasn't completely closed to women. High-ranking priestesses were certainly literate. Enheduanna proves that, but ordinary women from merchant or artisan families could also become scribes if they showed aptitude and their families supported their education. Slavery appears in many documents, and it's important not to romanticize it. Slaves were property, could be bought and sold, had limited rights. But Sumerian slavery was different from later forms in some ways. Slaves could own property themselves, conduct business, even buy their freedom. Children born to 1 slave and 1 free parent had intermediate status, not fully slave. A manumission document, Namu grants freedom to his slave Ulal in recognition of 20 years of faithful service. Lal is no longer obligated to Namu. He may live where he chooses, work for whom he wishes, and all his property belongs to him, witnessed and sealed. Freedom could be earned or purchased. Slavery, while unjust by modern standards, wasn't always permanent or total in Sumerian society. Entertainment and leisure appear less often in the formal record, but hints survive. Board games, the royal game of being the most famous, with beautifully crafted boards found in tombs. Musical instruments listed in temple inventories, lyres, drums, flutes, cymbals. Festivals described as occasions of celebration with music, dancing, feasting. Taverns operated by women where people gathered socially. One text, perhaps satirically, describes a tavern scene. In the tavern, men drink beer and boast. They tell lies about their accomplishments. They sing badly and think themselves talented. They argue over nothing and believe themselves wise. they drink more beer and forget their troubles. In the morning they regret their words, but by evening they return to do it all again. Human nature, captured perfectly 4,000 years ago, the tavern scene hasn't changed much. Death and burial occupied significant attention. Funerary provision lists detail what was buried with the deceased for the burial of a Namu 1 bed, 2 changes of clothing, 10 loaves of bread, 3 jars of beer, 1 bronze knife, 1 bowl, coins for the ferryman. These provisions were meant to serve the deceased in the afterlife, but they also represent significant expense for the surviving family. Tomb inscriptions ask for remembrance. I am Namu, son of Lugalamaku. I lived an honest life. I treated my servants fairly. I honoured the gods. I leave behind 2 sons and a daughter. May they remember me. May they make offerings at my tomb. May my name not be forgotten. The desire for remembrance, for continued existence in memory, if not in body, runs through Sumerian culture. Death was final, the afterlife grim, but being remembered offered a kind of immortality. The profound ordinariness of these documents is what makes them so valuable. Grand literature impresses us. Mathematical and astronomical achievements amaze us. But these everyday tablets, the receipts and contracts and complaints and recipes, they make the Sumerians human. Their concerns were our concerns. They worried about money, dealt with difficult neighbours, tried to provide for their children, hoped for recognition, feared being forgotten. 4,000 years separates us. Language, culture, technology, worldview, everything different. Yet reading these tablets, the distance collapses. A father worried about his son away at school. A customer angry about shoddy goods. A couple planning their wedding. A doctor trying to save a patient. A grandmother with back pain. These aren't ancient aliens or mysterious civilization builders. These are people, recognizably, undeniably, wonderfully human, and thousands more such tablets wait unread. More letters, more contracts, more complaints, more recipes, more glimpses into daily lives lived 4,000 years ago. More people waiting to be remembered, to have their voices heard, to remind us that human nature is constant even as everything else changes. But to understand the Sumerians fully, we must understand not just their daily concerns, but their deepest beliefs, the religious and philosophical framework that gave meaning to their lives, that explained their world, that addressed the eternal questions all humans ask about existence, purpose, and what lies beyond death. Section 9, Religion and Cosmology. To read Sumerian tablets is to enter a world where gods walked among men, where the boundary between divine and human was porous, where religious belief shaped every aspect of existence from the grandest temple ritual to the most mundane daily decision. Understanding Sumerian religion isn't merely academic. It's essential to understanding how they saw themselves, their world, and their place in the cosmos. The Sumerian pantheon was vast and complex, with a hierarchy that mirrored human society. At the top stood the great cosmic gods, and was the sky god, primordial father, source of ultimate authority, but somewhat distant from human affairs, like a king who rules, but delegates daily governance. Enlil, god of air and storms, was more active, the executive power who enforced divine decisions. Enki, god of fresh water and wisdom, was the clever problem solver, the god who often sided with humans. Nineveh, the mother goddess, represented fertility and life itself. Below these cosmic powers were the city gods, each major city having its own patron deity. Uruk belonged to Inanna, goddess of love and war, a combination that puzzled early scholars until they recognized that both involve passion, intensity, and the overturning of normal order. Served Nanna, the moon god, whose temple dominated the city's skyline. Nippur was sacred to Enlil, making it a pilgrimage destination and religious capital even when it lacked political power. Then came the lesser gods, specialized deities overseeing specific aspects of existence: grain, beer, brick-making, scribal arts, cattle, sheep, wild animals, rivers, mountains, each domain under divine patronage. Below them were various supernatural beings: demons, spirits, protective entities, messengers forming a vast celestial bureaucracy that paralleled earthly bureaucracy in its complexity and hierarchy. What's striking about Sumerian gods is how human they were. They weren't omnipotent, omniscient, or perfectly good. They had needs, desires, weaknesses. They got hungry and required offerings. They appreciated praise and grew angry when neglected. They played favorites, held grudges, made mistakes. They argued among themselves, formed alliances, sometimes competed for power. The creation myths reveal this pragmatic theology. In one myth, the universe emerged from Namu, the primordial sea, an eternal mother goddess. She gave birth to Enheduanna and Ki Earth, who were initially united. Enlil separated them, creating space for air and life between heaven and earth. From this separation, the ordered cosmos emerged, though order remained something that required constant divine maintenance. But why did gods create humans? Not out of love or loneliness or desire for fellowship. According to Sumerian myth, the gods created humans for purely practical reasons. They were tired of working. The younger gods had been digging canals, tending fields, maintaining the world's infrastructure. They went on strike, refusing to continue the hard labor. The great gods, faced with rebellion, needed a solution. Enki proposed creating a new species, humans, to do the work. So humans were fashioned from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god. This explains human nature in Sumerian thought were made of earth, mortal and limited. But we also contain divine essence, the blood of God, which explains our consciousness, creativity, and ability to worship. We're hybrid beings, caught between earth and heaven, mortal yet possessing something divine. This creation story isn't just mythology. It's theology, explaining human purpose. We exist to serve the gods, to maintain their temples, to provide offerings, to do the work they no longer wish to do themselves. But implicit in this narrative is also that gods need us. They created us out of necessity, without humans who would maintain the world. This makes the relationship between gods and humans one of mutual dependence, not simple domination. The concept of me pronounced May was central to Sumerian understanding of cosmic order. The Mes were divine decrees, powers, or aspects of civilization. Over 100 are mentioned in various texts. They included abstract concepts like kingship, justice, truth, but also concrete things: metalworking, writing, music, sexual intercourse, temple prostitution, warfare, victory, defeat, friendship, enmity. Each me was a building block of civilized existence. One famous myth describes how Inanna traveled to Eridu to visit her father, Enki. She got him drunk. Apparently divine beings could get intoxicated, and convinced him to give her the Ms. He handed them over in his drunken state. When he sobered and realized what he'd done, he sent monsters to retrieve them. But Inanna had already escaped with the Mes to her city Oru. This myth explains how Uruk became a great city. Enheduanna brought civilization itself there. But the story also reveals Sumerian values. The Mesivilization could be stolen, transferred, lost. They weren't inherent, but required active possession and protection. A city's greatness depended on having the appropriate means and using them properly. Civilization was fragile, requiring constant effort to maintain. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses, major landowners, employers of thousands. A large temple complex owned fields stretching for miles, employed farmers to work them, stored the harvest in massive granaries, redistributed goods to workers, priests, and the poor. Temples functioned as banks, lending silver and grain. They operated workshops producing textiles, metalwork, pottery. They kept meticulous records of everything. Thousands of economic tablets from temple archives survive. This wasn't corruption of religion by economics. For Sumerians, the economic and religious were inseparable. The god owned the land and resources. The temple was the god's household. The priests were the god's servants, managing divine property. The workers were serving the god by working temple lands. Offerings made to the god entered the temple economy and were redistributed to priests, to temple workers, to the poor who depended on temple charity. The ziggurat dominated every major city's skyline, a massive stepped pyramid built from millions of mud bricks, rising in 3 or more tiers toward heaven. At the summit stood a small shrine, the god's actual dwelling place. Processions would climb the steep staircases during festivals, priests carrying offerings and sacred objects to the very peak, where earth touched heaven. Building a ziggurat was a multi-generational project requiring enormous resources and labor. Kings who built or expanded ziggurats commemorated this achievement in inscriptions, boasting of how many bricks were used, how high the structure rose, how well they served their patron god. The ziggurat was both religious statement, we honor our god, and political statement, we have the power and organization to build on this scale. Most ziggurats are ruins now, eroded by 4,000 years of wind and occasional rain, their baked brick facades stripped away, revealing the mud brick cores. But in their prime, they were magnificent, visible for miles across the flat plain, their walls likely plastered and painted, gleaming white or coloured, topped with shrines decorated with precious materials. Approaching a Sumerian city, you would have seen the ziggurat first, long before the city walls came into view. The priesthood was complex and hierarchical. At the top sat the high priest or high priestess, sometimes a king's relative, combining religious authority with political connections. Regular priests performed daily rituals, maintained the temple, managed economic activities. Specialized priests existed for specific functions: purification priests, divination priests, dream interpreters, exorcists who drove away demons, singer priests who performed sacred music. Women served as priestesses with significant authority. The Naditu were religious devotees who didn't marry, but could own property and conduct business. The Entu was a high priestess position, often held by a king's daughter Enheduanna, being the most famous example. These weren't token positions. Women holding them wielded real religious and economic power. Rituals and festivals structured the year. The New Year festival Akitu was the most important, lasting days, involving elaborate ceremonies. The king underwent ritual humiliation, symbolically dying and being reborn, then participating in sacred marriage with the goddess, or her high priestess representative, ensuring fertility and prosperity for the coming year. Commoners participated in public portions of festivals, watching processions, attending communal feasts, singing hymns together. Daily temple rituals were less dramatic, but equally important. Each morning, priests woke the god's statue, offered it food and drink, dressed it in fine clothing, entertained it with music. At night, they prepared the god for sleep. The statue wasn't just a representation of the god in Sumerian thought. The properly consecrated statue actually contained the god's presence. Caring for it was caring for the deity itself. The Sumerian view of the afterlife was remarkably grim, especially compared to later Egyptian optimism. When people died, their spirits descended to the underworld, a dark, dreary place described as a dusty land where the dead wore feathers like birds and ate clay for bread. Everyone went there, regardless of virtue or status. There was no heaven for the righteous, no hell for the wicked. Death was the great equalizer, and the afterlife offered no rewards. This belief shaped Sumerian values profoundly. Since death ended everything good, immortality had to be found in this life. Fame, accomplishment, children who would remember you, works that would outlast you, these became paths to immortality. Gilgamesh's journey illustrates this. He seeks literal immortality, fails, but finds symbolic immortality in the great works he accomplished, the walls of Uruk that will stand after he is gone. Remembrance was crucial. Tomb inscriptions plead for descendants to make offerings. Speak the deceased's name, not forget them. May my name not be forgotten appears repeatedly. If you were remembered, spoke about, offered to, you achieved a kind of continued existence. But to be forgotten was to truly die, to vanish completely. Divination, reading omens to predict the future, was systematic and sophisticated. Hepatoscopy involved examining the liver of sacrificed sheep. The liver's shape, color, and markings supposedly revealed divine intentions. Clay models of livers have been found with written notations, apparently teaching tools for training priests in interpretation. This seems bizarre to us, but the underlying logic made sense in Sumerian cosmology. The gods controlled events. They could reveal their intentions through signs, and systematic observation of those signs allowed prediction. Astronomical omens operated similarly. We discussed earlier the astronomical records Sumerians compiled. These served dual purposes: scientific observation and omen interpretation. When Venus appears in Scorpio, the king will fall ill. The celestial event didn't, cause the earthly event rather. Both reflected divine intention. By observing the heavens, priests could discern what the gods planned. Dream interpretation was another form of divination. Dreams came from gods, offering glimpses of future events. Professional dream interpreters existed, and tablets catalogued dream symbols with their meanings. Some interpretations seem to make intuitive sense. Dreaming of flying meant success or elevation. Others seem arbitrary. Dreaming of eating a crow meant something entirely specific that we can't reconstruct with confidence. Magic and medicine intertwined. Incantations accompanied medical treatments. An infection might be treated both with herbal poultices and with spells driving away the demon causing the illness. This seems contradictory to us. If demons cause disease, why use medicine? If medicine works, why invoke spirits? But Sumerians didn't see the contradiction. Multiple causation was possible. Demons might cause illness, but herbs could still help. The practical and supernatural complemented rather than contradicted each other. Protective amulets and magical objects were common. Cylinder seals, in addition to their practical function of marking ownership and authenticating documents, also served as protective amulets. The images carved on them gods, protective spirits. Mythological scenes offered magical protection to the owner. Certain stones had protective properties. Words written on tablets could carry power. Cursed tablets consigned enemies to supernatural punishment. Yet alongside this magical thinking existed ethical and moral codes that feel surprisingly modern. Truth was valued. Justice mattered. Personal responsibility before gods was real. While gods might be capricious, humans still had obligations: honesty in commerce, care for family, respect for elders, justice for the weak and poor. Temple inscriptions boast that a king made the strong not oppress the weak, protected the widow and orphan, ensured justice in the land. Whether kings actually did this is debatable. Power corrupts in all eras. But the fact that they felt compelled to claim it reveals cultural values. A good king in Sumerian ideology was one who ensured justice, not just military victory. Power carried responsibility. The gods judged kings on how well they maintained marked cosmic order and justice. Prayer was both communal and deeply personal. Public prayers in temples followed fixed formulas, but personal prayers to gods show genuine emotion. Penitential psalms confess sins and beg forgiveness. Lamentations pour out grief. Prayers of thanksgiving express gratitude. One prayer to a personal god says, "My God, you have been angry with me, but look upon me now. Accept my supplications. I am troubled. I am weary. Help me. Without you, what am I? You are my creator. Be merciful." This intimacy between individual and deity, the concept of a personal god who watched over you, specifically coexisted with the grand cosmic theology. Each person had a personal god and goddess who interceded with the great gods on their behalf, who protected them, who could be appealed to directly. Religious life operated on multiple scales simultaneously: cosmic, civic, and intensely personal. Theodicee, the question of why innocent people suffer, troubled Sumerians as it troubles us. Several texts wrestle with this problem. The Sumerian Job describes a righteous man who suffers despite his virtue. He prays, confesses sins he doesn't remember committing, pleads with his God for explanation. Eventually, his God responds, his suffering ends, but no satisfactory explanation is given for why it happened in the first place. The text doesn't solve the problem of undeserved suffering. It acknowledges the problem exists and that divine justice is often incomprehensible to humans. This theological sophistication, recognizing genuine problems with no easy answers, elevates Sumerian religion beyond simple mythology. They grappled with questions that all religious traditions eventually must confront. If gods are just, why do the righteous suffer? If gods are powerful, why does evil exist? If gods care about humans, why do disasters occur? The tablets show them asking these questions, trying different answers, ultimately accepting that some mysteries remain beyond human understanding. Mythology served multiple functions. Some myths explained natural phenomena, why snakes shed their skin, why there are seasons, why the moon waxes and wanes. Others provided historical memory wrapped in symbolic form. The flood myth might preserve memory of catastrophic flooding in Mesopotamia's past. City destruction myths match archaeological evidence of actual destructions. Mythology encoded history, making it memorable, passing it through generations. The sacred king concept held that the ruler was intermediary between gods and people, responsible for maintaining cosmic order. If the king failed through injustice, impiety, or incompetence, the cosmos itself was endangered. Floods, drought, disease, military defeat, all might result from a king's failure to properly fulfill divine responsibility. This placed enormous pressure on kings, but also gave them religious legitimacy. They ruled by divine right, but also divine burden. Annual renewal rituals reflected this. Each year, during the New Year festival, the king underwent ritual death and resurrection. His crown was temporarily removed. He was struck and humiliated. He confessed sins. Then he was restored to kingship. This symbolized the world's death in winter and rebirth in spring, but also reaffirmed the king's fitness to rule, his submission to divine authority, his renewed commitment to justice. Religious texts waiting in untranslated tablets number in the thousands. More hymns, more prayers, more myths, more theological treatises. What else did they believe? How did beliefs evolve over Sumerian civilization's 1,500-year span? What questions did they ask that we haven't yet heard? What answers did they propose that might surprise us? Every religion reflects the deepest concerns of the people who practice it. Sumerian religion reflected their environment, the need to control water, the fear of flood and drought, the importance of agricultural cycles. It reflected their social structure, hierarchical, bureaucratic, concerned with order and proper roles. It reflected their psychology, the human need for meaning, for protection, for hope in the face of mortality, for justice in an often unjust world. Reading their religious texts, we find ourselves surprisingly. We ask the same questions, we fear the same things, we hope for the same reassurances. The gods they imagined might seem strange to us, but the needs those gods fulfilled: community, meaning, moral framework, comfort in suffering, celebration in joy, these are universal. But religion didn't exist in isolation. It was woven into every aspect of Sumerian life, including law and political organization. To understand the Sumerians fully, we must examine how they organized their society, how they created justice, how they managed power, all of which occurred within their religious worldview, but also had practical, secular dimensions. Section 10 final reflections return with me to that museum gallery where we began. The glass case, the clay fragments, the wedge-shaped marks pressed by hands 4,000 years gone. But now you see them differently. You have journeyed through the discovery of these tablets, Layard at Nineveh, finding chamber after chamber filled with clay, the Assyrian reverence that preserved Sumerian wisdom across centuries. You have met the scholars who risked their lives to decipher cuneiform, who spent lifetimes translating texts, who opened windows into a vanished world. You've encountered the Sumerians themselves not as mysterious ancients, but as people who built cities from mud and ambition, who looked at an unforgiving landscape and transformed it through engineering and cooperation, who invented writing to preserve knowledge, mathematics to build and calculate, astronomy to understand the heavens, medicine to heal the sick. You have read their mathematics tablets and marveled at trigonometry 1,000 years before the Greeks. At base 60 number systems we still use every time we check a clock. You have followed their astronomical observations, Venus tracked for 21 years, eclipses predicted, the metonic cycle discovered and applied. You've studied their medical texts, finding evidence-based treatments, pharmaceutical knowledge, clinical documentation of successes and failures. You have been moved by their literature. Gilgamesh wrestling with mortality, his grief for Enkidu so raw it transcends millennia. Love poetry celebrating desire without shame. The lament for a weeping for a destroyed city. Enheduanna, the first named author in history, a woman's voice preserved in clay, speaking her crisis of faith and her restoration. Wisdom literature that makes you smile, the complaints about strict teachers, the satire about drunk tavern-goers, the timeless observation that eating too much prevents sleep. You have puzzled over Anomalous tablets, learning to balance open-minded curiosity with appropriate skepticism, recognizing that what seems impossible might be misunderstood, that translation is imperfect, that cultural context is partially lost across 4,000 years. You have walked through daily Sumerian life, the business transactions, the complaint letter about bad copper that still makes us laugh, the legal disputes over property boundaries, the marriage contracts protecting both parties, the adoption papers creating family through love and law, the personal letters showing worried parents, affectionate sisters, busy merchants, the recipes, the medical case studies, the evidence of ordinary lives lived with the same concerns we have today. And you have entered their religious world gods who needed humans as much as humans needed them, temples as economic centers and spiritual homes, ziggurats rising toward heaven, festivals bringing communities together, personal prayers revealing intimate faith, theological wrestling with suffering and injustice, the grim afterlife that made remembrance precious and accomplishment urgent. What has this journey revealed? That the Sumerians were us. The same intelligence, the same creativity, the same range of emotions, the same capacity for love and grief, curiosity and fear, generosity and pettiness, the same drive to understand their world, to build something lasting, to be remembered after death. They succeeded beyond measure. 4,000 years have passed. Their cities are ruins. Their language has been dead for 2,000 years. Every person who spoke Sumerian as a mother tongue, who thought in that language, who dreamed in those words, all gone to dust millennia ago. The Tigris and Euphrates still flow, but the canals the Sumerians dug are buried under sand. The fields they irrigated have returned to desert. The ziggurats they built with such effort are eroded mounds, barely recognizable as human construction. But their words remain. 500,000 tablets, perhaps more, scattered across museum collections worldwide. 30,000 translated and published. Hundreds of thousands waiting. Each one a voice from the past, ready to speak if someone will listen. Each one preserving some fragment of knowledge, some moment of human experience, some observation about the world, some expression of hope or fear or wonder. Consider what they gave us. Writing itself, the foundation of history, the tool that allows knowledge to accumulate across generations. Without writing, each generation would start fresh, learning only what elders could remember and pass along orally. With writing, knowledge compounds, building on itself, accelerating over millennia. Mathematical systems we still use. Astronomical observations that still inform our understanding of celestial mechanics. Medical knowledge that sometimes surprises modern researchers when tested. Legal concepts that influenced all subsequent law codes in the region. Literary forms, the epic, the hymn, the proverb that shaped world literature. The 60-minute hour, the 360-degree circle, the systematic organization of information. But beyond specific achievements, they gave us something more profound evidence of what humans can accomplish. They showed that civilization isn't something that happens to people, but something people create deliberately through cooperation, innovation, and sustained effort across generations. They proved that humans 4,000 years ago, without computers, without electricity, without any technology we'd recognize as modern, could be sophisticated, thoughtful, creative, and wise. This matters now more than ever. We live in an age that sometimes looks at the past with condescension, assuming modern people are fundamentally smarter or more capable than ancient peoples. The Sumerian tablets refute this assumption. They show us that human potential has always been present, that what changes is knowledge and tools, not fundamental human capacity. A Sumerian child born in 2500 BCE, if transported to our time and raised in our society, would be indistinguishable from any other child. They would learn our technology, speak our languages, understand our science, participate in our culture, and a modern child transported to ancient Sumer would grow up Sumerian, learning cuneiform, mastering sexagesimal mathematics, observing the stars from ziggurat tops, thinking thoughts in a language we've had to resurrect from clay. The distance between us is time, not nature, and yet the distance is real. We cannot fully know them. We translate their language, but translation is interpretation, and interpretation involves choices, assumptions, biases. We excavate their cities, but ruins tell only part of the story. The stone and clay remains, while wood, cloth, leather, most of daily life decays and vanishes. We read their tablets, but were missing context, missing the knowledge they assumed everyone had, missing the nuances that would have been obvious to them, but are invisible to us. Every translation is provisional. Every interpretation is incomplete. Future scholars, with better tools and more knowledge, will find errors in our current understanding. This is humbling, but also hopeful. It means there is always more to discover, more to understand, more connections to make across time. And so much literally remains to be read. Hundreds of thousands of tablets sit in storage. Some have been photographed, catalogued, assigned numbers, but never translated. Some sit in boxes, awaiting even basic cataloguing. Some are in private collections, inaccessible to scholars. Some are still buried in a rocky soil, waiting for excavations that may not happen for decades due to political instability, lack of funding, or simply because there are too many sites and too few archaeologists. What knowledge waits in that unread clay? What mathematical insights? What astronomical observations? What medical treatments? What literature that could take its place among humanity's great works? What personal letters that would make us laugh or cry? What business records that would illuminate economic history? What religious texts that would deepen our understanding of their beliefs? We don't know. We can't know until someone reads them. This creates an unusual situation in historical scholarship. We're not limited by lack of sources. We have sources and embarrassment of riches, more primary documents than we can process. We're limited by time, funding, and trained experts. The knowledge exists, preserved, waiting. It's a problem of access and resources, not a fundamental absence of information. This means that discoveries will continue. Every few years, someone translates a tablet that's been sitting in a museum for a century and finds something unexpected. A mathematical technique, an astronomical observation, a literary work, a personal letter that illuminates daily life. These discoveries will continue for generations, perhaps centuries, until finally, if we don't destroy ourselves, first we have read everything the Sumerians left us. But even then, even when every tablet has been translated, mysteries will remain. Because reading words isn't the same as understanding minds. We can read what they wrote, but can we truly grasp what they meant? Can we enter their worldview fully enough to see the world as they saw it? Can we think thoughts in the shape of their thoughts? Feel emotions the way they felt them? Understand their jokes, their metaphors, their references, their silences? Probably not entirely. The gulf of time is too vast. But we can try, and in trying, in the effort to understand them, something beautiful happens. We connect across time. We reach toward them, and they, through their tablets, through their preserved words, reach toward us. The connection isn't perfect, but it's real. A teacher 4,000 years ago wrote in frustration on a student's tablet, "You wrote it crooked." We read it and smile, recognizing the eternal struggle between teacher and student. That's connection. Gilgamesh wept over Enkidu's body, refusing to accept his friend's death. We read his grief and feel it, because we have known loss too. That's connection. A customer complained bitterly about poor quality copper from a merchant. We laugh at the sarcasm, the outrage, the very human indignation at being cheated. That's connection. A father wrote to his son studying in another city, "Your mother worries. Write more often." 4,000 years collapse, and we know exactly how that father felt, exactly what that mother experienced. That's connection, these moments of recognition. When the ancient becomes contemporary, when the stranger becomes familiar, these are gifts the tablets give us. They remind us that human nature is constant even as everything else changes. The tools differ, the languages differ, the technologies differ, but the fundamental human experience, love, grief, hope, fear, curiosity, creativity, the desire to understand and be understood, this is timeless. The Sumerians wanted to be remembered. They said so explicitly in their tomb inscriptions, in their building dedications, in the way they signed their works and taught their children. They created writing partly to preserve knowledge across time. They built in clay, because clay lasts. They pressed their words into tablets, hoping that those words would survive them. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Not only did their words survive, but we, people they could never have imagined, living in ways they couldn't conceive, possessing technologies that would seem like magic, we read their words. We study their mathematics. We admire their literature. We learn from their medicine. We puzzle over their mysteries. We laugh at their jokes. We mourn their losses. We celebrate their achievements. We remember them, and in remembering, we honor them, not with offerings at tombs, not with prayers to their gods, but by doing what they hoped future generations would do, reading what they wrote, understanding what they understood, building on what they built, continuing the great human project of accumulating knowledge, creating beauty, asking questions, seeking truth. The tablets still speak in museum galleries, in university collections, in online databases where digitized images can be viewed by anyone with internet access, in scholarly journals where new translations appear, in classrooms where students learn cuneiform, in documentaries that bring Sumerian achievements to millions, in books and articles that explore their world. in conferences where experts debate interpretations, and in moments like this, when someone pauses before a glass case, looks at clay fragments covered in ancient writing, and wonders, what does it say? Who wrote it? What did they want to tell us? That wonder, that curiosity, that desire to connect across time, this is how the tablets speak. Not with voices, not with sounds, but with the silent persistence of preserved words waiting for readers. They speak through the labor of scholars who dedicate years to translating difficult texts. They speak through the museums that preserve them. They speak through the databases that make them accessible. They speak through anyone who cares enough to look, to read, to try to understand. They speak through you, now, having journeyed with me through this exploration. You have heard their voices filtered through translation, interpreted through modern understanding, incomplete but real. You know them better than you did. You have met them not as mysterious ancients, but as people who lived, loved, struggled, created, and hoped their works would matter. Their works do matter. Their tablets still teach us. Their mathematics still challenges us. Their astronomy still informs us. Their medicine still surprises us. Their literature still moves us. Their daily lives still resonate with us. Their questions still puzzle us. Their achievements still inspire us. And hundreds of thousands of tablets still wait, patient, silent, ready to speak when someone finally has time to listen. The Sumerians invented writing to preserve knowledge across time. They succeeded beyond measure. Their words survived the fall of their civilization, the forgetting of their language, the passage of 4,000 years. And now, in museum galleries and university libraries, in storage rooms and online databases, their tablets wait patient, silent, full of secrets. They wait for us to read them. They wait to teach us who they were, what they knew, what they hoped for. They wait to remind us that we are part of a human story that began when someone first pressed a reed stylus into wet clay and decided that their words, their thoughts, their knowledge was worth preserving forever. They were right. And so, across the unbridgeable gap of time, the impossible distance of 4 millennia, the Sumerian tablets still speak, and we, at last, are listening